order to obtain an accurate account of the number of SMMEs and cooperatives in both the informal and the formal sector in South Africa. The database should provide an accurate picture of the landscape of SMMEs that are operating in the country. There is also a need to implement a comprehensive register or database of business development services providers containing details such as the provider's field of specialization and as well as location. So the above will then inform business development support services and resource allocation as well as program design. Another policy proposal is the simplification of processes. There's a need to implement easy, fast, and...
Excuse me?
I think there's a call online. I don't know if you want. Okay. Thanks. You see now, I'm being further exposed. The other policy proposal is the simplification of processes. There is a need to implement easy, fast, and cost-effective business registration processes. There's a need to implement clear and simplified loan application processes. Further, the policy proposes to the development of a common application and as well as a business plan template.
Let me move into a different seat.
I promise that was not me. I know I would like to show you my dance moves, but not yet. Maybe around 1:30. Mr. Tech, are we good to go? Oh, okay, all right. Okay, and the role players then in this industry should then consider developing a referral framework to deal with misdirected applications. Another policy proposal speaks to targeted funding instruments for SMMEs. Here we're saying funders should develop support mechanisms for SMMEs that are focusing on different stages of the business development cycle in order to improve program targeting, quality, as well as the relevance of support programs. Furthermore, funding support should target township and rural areas, as well as your designated groups, specifically youth, women, and people with disabilities. Furthermore, the targeting should drill down as much as targeting informal separately from the formal sector. The next policy proposal is speaks to the issue of collateral, and I think this was mentioned as well earlier on, is that a majority of SMMEs in the country do not have collateral, and hence they are perceived to be risky lenders. But however, the past imbalances of South Africa has resulted in little or no land ownership opportunities, limited opportunities to accumulate assets, and unequal distribution of wealth. And therefore, SMMEs are often experiencing challenges in securing debt funding. What the policy proposes is that lenders should advance loans based on affordability, meaning cash flow based as opposed to collateral lending as number one, and further accept other forms of movable assets such as equipment, machinery as collateral. And there is a need to overhaul the existing government credit guarantee scheme to ensure that there is increased uptake and greater impact. And furthermore, South Africa to implement a movable collateral registry to recognize other assets classes as collateral. That would include account receivables, cash, and cash equivalents. The next policy proposals is SMMEs empowerment and protection. Largely, we are saying here, as part of SMMEs empowerment and protection, financial institutions should roll out initiatives aimed at educating small businesses about their credit rights, such as the rights to apply for credit, request statements of account, negotiate loan terms, and reasons for being credit refused. And funders should also heighten awareness about credit rights, as well as alternative dispute resolution mechanisms. The policy also proposes a fund of funds. This is aimed at creating business linkages between small and large businesses. Despite the allocation of 1% on enterprise development, evidence shows that not all funds are deployed effectively in any year, despite many Black-owned SMMEs being in dire need for support, seed, growth, and sustainability funds. So the government, through DSBD, must establish the fund of funds for the benefit of the SMME sector. The fund will be capitalized with the percentage point allocated to ED and the under expenditure from the measured entities. The last policy proposal that I'll speak to is on legislation applicable to the SMME sector, which is on the income tax. The policy is proposing that tax incentives be introduced to support the growth of the SMME sector. Currently, SMMEs need to register to collect and pay VAT if they have an annual turnover of more than 1 million. The South African Revenue Services should consider revising the turnover threshold upwards and enable SMMEs and cooperatives to invest the proceeds from the activities in the business growth. I'm going to give this one a skip. In terms of the update that's been done so far, as indicated earlier, the stakeholder consultations were already held earlier this year. We have consolidated the comments received. The policy has been revised, and as well as the second draft of the policy is already also done. It's just currently going through the internal DSBD approval stages, and work in progress is to have the second draft approved by the minister by the end of the month, and then presented at the asset cluster by mid-December, which will then be followed by submission of the policy to cabinet. Number 8, we will then have the policy gazetted for public comments, and then there would be generation of the final version of the policy, which is targeted for the end of March, as well as then having the policy approved by cabinet, the final one. Currently, what is also happening parallel to all these other processes is that the implementation plan that would go with this funding policy is also being put together. And with that being said, I'd like to say thank you for your ears, ladies and gentlemen.
Ms. Khwabi, for telling us about the initiatives of the department regarding the policy side for SMMEs and cooperatives. One of the things that I picked out of your presentation was that 50% that's going to be allocated by provincial departments and DFIs specifically for SMMEs and cooperatives. I'm sure that will be a welcome development, especially in addressing issues of access to finance. I think, Khwabi, you're still open to inputs other than what we will glean from this discussion today. And I'm also inviting some of the online participants to reach out to Hwabi if you need a copy of that draft report. Without further ado, I'd like to call on Ms. Lesego Mashego, who will take us through the review, the desktop review, and give us some high-level recommendations that came out of that report, which I mentioned earlier. Over to you, Lesego.
Good morning. My name is Lesego Mashego. I work for a company called Finmac Trust, and we do all sorts of things. But my main role here is to take you through some of the recommendations that came from the desk review. But before I do that, I'll take you through why this was done and what informed that desktop review, and then take you through the high-level recommendations. And Hwabi, I saw your timelines. They're very interesting because you still need to incorporate what comes out of here into that policy. So I guess DSBD team, you're going to have sleepless nights until the 30th of November so that you can incorporate everything that comes out of these things, because the intention is that we don't just talk, right? The intention is that we make sure that everything that we talk about actually is taken somewhere. I don't know how this thing works. Figure it out. So Hwabi, you and I are probably the same age group. People may assume that we are youth, we're not. So in terms of background, I think what is important to understand is that we have youth in South Africa. They are a lot, and many of them are unemployed. They represent actually a third of the population. According to the World Bank report, 60% were unemployed in 2020, and if you delve deeper, you find that those that are between 15 and 24 are the hardest hit, followed by those that are between 24 and 34. So you then ask yourself, they are unemployed, they've never worked before. So we're really saying to them, you must go and try out something. You've actually never been in a workplace before. You don't necessarily understand how finances work, and you potentially do not know how to manage a business. So we want to unleash you to the world, and we want you to become an SMME. It is a good thing, but it means we're going to have to work hard to ensure that they succeed in what they're doing. Our unemployment in South Africa is rooted in the structurally weak economy, as well as a mismatch between human capital development and the needs of the economy. And I think that's where it goes back to, you have a number of youth, you want them to be SMMEs. Are they entrepreneurial? Is it something that we encourage in our schools? Do they know what it is that they're going to do? But as well, from a government perspective, when we provide support to them, do we understand how we're going to support them given what they may face as entrepreneurs? So this particular session, the desk review, was to ensure that we help DSBD specifically, yes, through the European Union, through the SA-EU dialogue, to make sure that we come together and talk about what is there. How do we enable policymakers, business development support providers, financiers, investors, and young entrepreneurs to exchange best practice and to co-develop new access to finance solutions, and that's the reason why we're here. So the desk reviews really was there to take stock of what's there, and then to say, based on what's there and based on what's being done in the EU, hence it's an exchange, these are the recommendations that you could potentially look at as a South African government. So taking stock, I'm going to take you through high level. The report, I think, has been shared with everyone. So high level key things that we found as we were doing the desk review from a South African perspective. So South African SMME sector, I think we touched on this earlier on when we talked about SMMEs. They're actually a lot, eh? There's over 1 million enterprises that are owned by the youth, but many of them are micro. And again, many of them are informal. And again, many of them are resellers of goods. So your support services need to take into consideration that it's not a small business, it's actually a micro business. It's not a formal business, it's actually an informal business. It's not a business that creates things from scratch. It usually buys and resells to others. So from a regulatory perspective, South Africa is great. We have great policies in place, but our policies focus on high job-creating businesses, so we leave out the tech, we leave out the innovation, we leave out, and we focus on jobs. But some of these entities actually are not gonna create jobs, and we need to be realistic, and we still need to support them. We also focus on formal, and we focus on the small and the medium. And I'm gonna take you back to what I said about the sector. It's micro, it's informal, and they are resellers of goods. So when we focus on formal, small and medium businesses, then there's something that we need to change as a country. From a funding and finance perspective, requirements for receiving funding are cumbersome and making funding out of reach for startups. And our startups, again, go back to the SMME sector, the SA SMME sector, and then you'll understand that they're informal. They may not have all the requirements that we require of them for them to be able to get funding. We also have a culture, and this is not just the private sector. We are a risk-averse country. But SMMEs are risky. And when they are run by youth, they become a little bit more risky because they will need more support. From a local and global markets perspective, market access is limited, with youth enterprises indicating not having enough customers and also having concerns over competition. And that should be correct, right? So, Dr. Raymond, you mentioned that when you're in Mozambique, everyone's selling bracelets, which means there's high competition because they basically selling the same thing, which means we are then going to have to find a way to create markets for them to ensure that they're able to sell to those that need their goods. From a human capital education and training perspective, programs tend to focus on business skills for entrepreneurs, and then they forget that the entrepreneurs actually need skills that will support them as well. So we want to make sure that you, the entrepreneur, can do the work, but then we forget that you, the entrepreneur, may actually need a team of people that are going to support you. Are SETAs geared to do that? I'm not sure. I think mainly big businesses will go to the SETAs, and small businesses don't get that support. So from a recommendations perspective, understanding where we are, understanding what the country has from a policy perspective, key recommendations for us were that we needed to strengthen or add the reporting agencies of the DSBD to foster the development of partnerships around innovation and technological development. And I'm going to go back to what I said. So we support high job creating entities, but also from an institutional perspective, we have an environment that's fragmented. DSBD, yes, has CIFA and CEDA that reports to them, but based on what we could find and based on the areas that I spoke to you about, SMMEs, and while we were taking stock, it's very clear that this fragmentation then has an impact on the SMME. So having a centralized body that is there with the correct institutions reporting to it to ensure that it provides the necessary support. And I think, Auspulani, you mentioned something that I really liked. When we talk about a value chain approach, you're not gonna have a value chain approach if we are fragmented and we're not coordinated. So when you have a centralized body, then you're able to do that. A key thing in South Africa, and this is us picking up also from the EU on what they do, it's important that we develop programs that focus on startups. Like I said, we look at formal, we look at small, we look at medium, which means we've excluded the chunk of the businesses that we want to support. So it's important that we then look at programs that will look at startups from a development perspective, from a formalization perspective. And I think oftentimes then people will ask, what do we mean about this formalization? And I think that's what policy needs to articulate. Is formalization really a CIPC registration and a SARS registration? And is it that? For South Africa, is that what we want? Or is formalization a creation of an ID for a business so that we can know who the business is and then serve them at that level? And as they graduate from one point to another, then we're able to graduate with them and give them other requirements. And I think that's something that would then need to be factored into the policy. We spoke about data, and then I think data comes up everywhere. For you to be able to serve, you need to understand the market that you're serving. If you're not clear on the market that you're serving, what it is that they're doing, what it is that they need, then you're going to miss what it is or how you need to serve them. It's important that we involve a wide audience of stakeholders to make sure that they contribute to that which we create as policies. And I think from a DSBD perspective, it's important that sessions like this are arranged on a regular basis. So even when you do your monitoring and evaluation, and you pick up that there are challenges there and there, it's important that you come back to the people that you're trying to serve and say, what have we done right and what has gone wrong in what we were trying to do? And then explore mechanisms that will build youth business skills through mentorship. And who are these mentors? So we may have business development support providers. Are they always business people? Or is it a duty of government to actually find business people who have failed, who have experienced the challenges that businesses experience, to then be the mentors of these young entrepreneurs? It's similar to what we do in the workplace, right? So when I got in, I had a mentor, but that mentor did the same job that I do. It was not a different mentor. I didn't get a doctor to be my mentor because they're not gonna help me. So I think it's thinking about what does that mentorship program look like? Expanding the job creation agenda of business support funding to strategies that encourage employment of 1 or 2 new employees by businesses in addition to the existing strategies that provide funding to sectors and industries that will have a high job creation. So yes, looking at high job creation, but looking at other initiatives as well, looking at tech, looking at other industries, and looking at how do you then bolster support for those industries. Yes, taking into consideration the job creation. Assessing the effectiveness of integrated funding and skills development programs, so that which are there. We do have programs in South Africa. I was actually at a Harambee event yesterday, and a guy said, it's interesting that South Africa has these great initiatives that are actually implemented elsewhere. So maybe it's up to us to look at them and say, so we do have them, what is it? What are we not doing? Or how do we enhance them to get us to where we want to go? And then a big thing that we need to do as South Africans is monitor and evaluate. Monitor and evaluate success and failures of support programs. Monitor and evaluate those that implement, how they implement. and what are their challenges. Because when you start understanding the challenges, then it's easier for you to then come in and address those challenges. But also simultaneously making sure that the support programs that you have are aligned to that which needs to be supported by your support program. I'm going to pause there because that's all I had to share with you today. And I don't have anything else to share. And these are just recommendations that were extracted. You will notice that they're not granular in nature. The granularity you get in a policy, because it then outlines what it is a government will do to ensure that these are implemented. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sis Liseho. That was short and sweet and loud and clear in terms of what is the way forward with the current recommendations of the policy. I think one of the insights that I picked up there is around getting data of why funding applications fail. It might be interesting to see if this is actually higher amongst youth-owned businesses. And I think it would be good that this issue is taken up when we have our panel discussion after tea. But also linked to that, you mentioned the issue around youth and skills. So through mentorship, I think that's also a very critical element. We now move on to our next speaker, who is from the Small Enterprise Development Agency, which is an agency of the Department of Small Business, Mr. Colin Leshaw, who will share with us their experiences of pre-investment support for youth-owned businesses. Over to you, sir.
Very, very unfair. When the ladies came up, you clapped hands for them. Really? Hey? Yes, I mean, thank you so much. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. As already introduced, my name is Colin. I am from the Small Enterprise Development Agency, an agency of the Department of Small Business Development. And believe it or not, we are older than the department. So in this sense, the child rules the mother. I'm not going to go through the entire presentation. I'm literally going to touch on certain things because I've got 2 videos that I would like to show you guys as well. The one that I would really like to speak on is the general statistics of the South African SMME sector. I'm also then going to look just at some of our products and services, because I'm speaking on why it is important that we have pre-investment. Now, I've seen it so many times where young people, or not only young people, but people would come, for video purposes, can I move outside of this, or must I just stand here? Can I move to the front? Okay, awesome. So, as I've said, people would come, they would say, but we do not need pre-investment services because we know exactly what we want to do. We only want the finance, and therefore, please give us the finance. Goes through to our DFIs, it goes through to, some of the commercial banks, and then those financiers would say, sorry, there's something that's missing here in your business plan. Can you go and fix it? And then people understand how important it is to look at pre-investment, to look at how do we get the business to the level that it's supposed to be. But let's quickly look at the general characteristics of the SMME sector in South Africa. It speaks about South Africa's official unemployment rate to be at 34.9%. the annual rate of, or the rate of unemployment among the youth that is ages between 15 to 24 is at 64.4%. I'm not even going to look at the looting that had occurred, and we know what actually happened there. The annual percentage of new entrants who will not find employment is sitting at 60%. That means young people that come out of university, those who finish school, they will not find employment. And we're speaking of meaningful employment within the economy. Then we are saying that the South Africa's established business ownership rate has increased from 2.2% in 2017 to 3.5% in 2019, but it is still far below the average for the overall African region and for developing countries, where Latin America is sitting at 3.5%. Our entrepreneurial activity rate has doubled from 7.5% in 2017 to 14.3% in 2019, but that is in the age group 45 to 54. Where are our young people? Then we are also saying that people's fear of failure in entrepreneurship is high, and it has increased from 2017 to 49.8%. So half of people that were surveyed said that they are actually scared to start businesses. And imagine how much more for young people that they would be scared to start businesses. So that means from a CEDA perspective, from a Department of Small Business perspective, we really need to look at how do we get young people into SMME development from a school level already. So we've got an entrepreneurship in schools program that we have, but is it enough? And then we are saying our ease of doing business ranking for South Africa compared to higher African economies, we are sitting at 84th out of 190 countries. Ladies and gentlemen, I didn't want to create a bleak, vision or prospect of what is happening within the country, but that is where we are at. And my duty as CEDA, as the Small Enterprise Development Agency, is really looking how do I get pre-investment support to these entrepreneurs and SMMEs, especially young people. Our mandate is to look at how do we facilitate, develop and coordinate, as well as foster partnerships across all spheres of government, the private sector and relevant stakeholders that may assist the agency to achieve its objectives. So that is just my introduction. I would like the team at the back to play the video that is called Seatles Brew. So Seatle is one of our clients. He's a youth-owned business. He's in the coffee business. He's done quite exceptionally well in terms of what he is doing. And through this video, I want to share with you what is possible if you really come and you speak to us, so that we can understand the business, we can get our diagnostic tools, used in the business, so that we can get to that. Thank you.
So, welcome to Seatles Brew. Hello, my name is Sishe Makubane. I'm the founder of Seatles Brew Roasted Coffee. So we are situated in North Riding, North View Shopping Center, and we are based in Gauteng. We've got two more shops, which is in North View, one of the coffee shop. And we also have a manufacturing plant in Northview Shopping Center. Then we've got one shop at Fairland Walk, where it's situated in close to Cresta. And then we'll also be opening soon another shop at in Woodmead. Okay, it all started when I was offered an opportunity by Roberto Monterrey in KZN. Where I used to help him to make coffee for about 3 days. It was an exhibition in Arts Festival in Hilton in KZN. So through that journey, he asked if I want to be trained as a barista. My answer was yes. When I first moved over from Durban to Joburg, the first day I had to learn how to make coffee, and obviously it's been for me it was a new thing in terms of learning how to make a proper coffee, because we have to learn about the temperature, the whole different types of brewing in terms of your homemade brewing, and then the ratio and everything. So it's been so difficult in terms of understanding the way the machine works, and then the way you need to brew and serve coffee. Oh, the first challenges that I faced through the journey when I started the business was, first of all, I've resigned because of the passion, and I wanted to do something, and I wanted to open my own company. And then the first thing was, I never used to unemployment. Basically, when you're employed, when you resign, and then when you start a company, automatically you're unemployed. On that journey, it took me to the next step where I've started the company alone, and I'm still individually own the brand or the company until today. The process of making coffee, it started when I had an opportunity to be funded through SIDA, which that was the first thing that happened in terms of getting funding through TTF, Technology Transfer Funds. Then in terms of that, I've took the training to the next level, where I taught some of the employees how to brew coffee, how to roast, and how to perfectly, consistently making coffee. And our main coffee that we do, it's come from Africa, Central America, and then we blend together, and then from there we sell it to your food lovers market, your Spar. Soon we're going to be in Pick and Pay, and also we are busy with other retail stores as well. Beside of our product offering,
So this is Sitle's Brew. Sitle's Brew, as you can see, is in the coffee business. You heard him saying soon he'll be in Pick and Pay and Spar, and that's not soon anymore. He is in all 3,300 Pick and Pay stores. Yes. Sitle is also in Food Lovers Market. He is currently exporting to the rest of the continent. Now, Sitle had a couple of interventions, and this is why pre-investment is so important, is that you would have heard him speak about the technology transfer assistance. That is one of our programs within SIDA. He was part of the incubation program. Quality and standards, you would see, has got beautiful packaging. So that packaging was done through quality and standards, as well as his labeling was done through quality and standards. He's just done a new flavored coffee series for Pick and Pay, 4 different flavors. And that flavoring or the flavor formulations was also done through quality and standards. Sitle participated in trade and facilitation, where he was taken to Starbucks in Seattle to go and learn how to do, coffee roasting properly. We've also assisted him with marketing as well as a website. And the reason why I'm speaking on these things, it shows you that before Sitle went out to seek for finance, he had to really make sure that his pre-investment was correct, and it was at a level where he was sure that now I can actually go and seek finance. Another thing that I wanted to tell you about Sitle's Brew is when COVID-19 hit, Sitle didn't apply for the TERS because he was in a position where you could pay his staff every month. And in fact, the business became so profitable during COVID-19 that he was able to get his staff to pay it forward. And the reason why I'm sharing this is because when we look at youth businesses, we look at businesses that should be minute, it should be small. It should be businesses that doesn't really have an impact in the world. And what we are trying to say is that we need businesses that will have an impact, that will make sure that moving forward, we are able then to look at all of the things that big businesses doing, that our small businesses could do that as well. I'm not going to speak too much on SIDA, but this for me is also quite important when we speak about pre-investment, that we understand what SIDA's roles and responsibilities are. When we speak about any type of business, we speak about a client journey approach that we take as CEDA. Now you would see that it says business talk, business start, business build, and business grow. So when we start engaging with the client, or when we talk to the client, that is when we understand what the business needs are. We will then have conversations. We do information sessions where clients or SMMEs would come and they would tell us what they are doing and what type of assistance that they would need. You would also see that under talk, we do entrepreneurship awareness, we do business startup training, business startup advice, etc. And then once we've started talking to the client, now we start assisting the business. This is where we would look at using our diagnostic tools, etc. And it is so important that a business gets introduced, and it doesn't necessarily need to be CEDA, but any type of agency or business that would be able to assist them with your non-financial assistance, that they go there. Because those are the people that would give them the advice that they need to take their business forward. How many in the room knows about Porsche M? So there's quite a number of hands. Porsche M is one of our clients that also went through almost the same that Sitle went through. At the moment, Porsche M, we visited her in April this year. At that point, her revenue for the first 4 months of the year was already 200 million rand. She's sitting with 180 clients. But it is because Porsche understood what pre-investment meant for her business. She, in a little corner, she still have the 2-plate stove that she used when she started the business. But now she's got these big tanks. She understands that, you know what, when I do skincare products, there is certain certifications that I need for it. And therefore, we were in a position to assist her with those certifications through the South African Bureau of Standards. Then we start building. So Porsche, as well as Sitle, then went through what we call our building process. Porsche was part of our national gazelles, where we take businesses and we propel them because we see that they have a potential to become bigger businesses. And I think that in itself really assisted her to then be now in her growing phase, where we're looking at access to local markets. So again, Porsche's also exporting to the rest of the continent. We're looking at our export opportunities. We're looking at business mentoring, as well as our facilitation of access to finance through our DFIs, our sister agency, the Small Enterprise Finance Agency, as well as other DFIs. But I also know that the Banking Association of South Africa did a report a couple of years ago where they spoke about the unbanked and the fact that we still have an issue with financial inclusion in South Africa. You have a lot of people that do not have access to finance, not because of anything else, but because of the fact that they never went through what we call pre-investment. They don't understand what it is that they need in the business because, hey, you don't need to have collateral at the moment if you are going to, apply to a DFI. We're speaking about credit guarantee schemes that comes to play where you could potentially request a credit guarantee to then serve as collateral on your behalf. The Cooler credit guarantee gives 85% of what you are about to borrow as a guarantee so that you are able to borrow then from CIFA as well as from the banks. I think it is important that we understand that any business needs to have some form of advice. Just another case study that I can share with you. We had a client. He was very new to business because he was retrenched from his job. And he came to us and he said, look, I don't know what to do. All that I know is landscaping because I'm a landscaper. Within a year after being advised, after going through what CEDA is giving through its support, that client now employs more than 700 people. And that shows you that, yes, finance is available. And I mean, there's a lot of studies in South Africa that shows that there is access to finance. But it is how do we get to that access to finance? And that is making sure that through pre-investment, you are able to get it. A lot of people, when normally CEDA and CIFA's in a room, they would look at us and people would flock towards CIFA and they will forget about CEDA. But that is where you need to start, because that is where we will advise, we will make sure that you understand what it is that you need in the business so that we can move forward and that you are able then to move your business forward. I think one of the other things that I would like to speak about is just some of our offerings that we have, and this is part of our pre-investment that we have as the entity. For survivalist and micro enterprises, we look at entrepreneurship awareness, we look at business startup training, business registrations, franchise awareness, we look at business planning, as well as business startup advice, and so the list goes on. But before I conclude, I would like them to play for me the video that speaks about CEDA incubation, so that I just give you an idea what happens within our incubation centers. The video will speak about 65 or 70 incubators. That's incorrect. Currently, we have 122 incubators throughout the country responsible for making sure that entrepreneurs get incubated and they are able to move with their businesses. Thank you.
Having an idea has been linked to the switching on of a light bulb, and with good reason. At CEDA, we believe in the illuminating power of great ideas and the difference they can make if the people with the ideas are given the means and the know-how to forge them into reality. We believe South Africa is full of passionate and innovative entrepreneurs with great ideas that deserve to see the light of day. The CEDA Incubation Program has for more than a decade been a source of light in the darkness for many young entrepreneurs. Currently, CEDA supports over 72 incubation centers across South Africa to create entrepreneurial wealth to the tune of around 800 million rand annually. This translates to creating on average 2,300 new jobs every year, simply by enabling entrepreneurs with innovative ideas to keep fanning the flames of their bright new ventures. Anybody with a viable business idea or any registered small, micro, and medium enterprise that is struggling to grow can approach any of the CEDA-supported incubators nationally for business incubation selection. The CEDA-supported incubators are comfortable, professional co-working and co-creation spaces full of color and energy, where like-minded entrepreneurs can share their ideas, contacts, and expertise. If your business idea is selected for incubation, CEDA will assist in providing the needed skills and knowledge for product development and to open up markets for your unique innovation, always with increased profitability and growth in mind. CEDA's goal with incubation is simply to help South African small enterprises grow to their full potential in order to employ more people, create new wealth, and enter new markets with cutting-edge products and services. At CEDA, we are in the business of opportunity. We are in the business of hope. Supporting an innovative business idea is to shine a light of hope, innovation, and prosperity on South Africa's entire emerging economy. At CEDA, we encourage entrepreneurs with bright ideas to contact us for support. Together, we can make a difference to make South Africa shine with entrepreneurial innovation.
Thank you. In conclusion, I would just like to leave you with this, that pre-investment is most probably one of the most important things that a business can go through to ensure longevity of their business, as well as, financial health of the business, because you have experts that will come in and they will then assist you in terms of taking the business forward. I think we spoke about incubation, we spoke about the technology transfer assistance, we spoke about quality and standards, we spoke about the one thing that we didn't speak about is innovation technology, and how important it is that even through getting people to understand pitching for funding, and how they need to start learning the concept of pitching, that will assist them in terms of moving forward with their businesses and understanding what that could potentially do for financial health of their businesses. In closing, ladies and gentlemen, if Pops, you, Masikela, and Beyonce had to do a mashup, they would most probably do something like this. You, Masikela, will sing to her, "I want to be there when the people start to turn it around, when they triumph over poverty. I want to be there when people start businesses and they become successful and they are able to economically be, free in terms of what they do." But then Beyonce will then say this back to him: "I want to leave my footprints on the sand of time. No, there was something that I left behind. When I leave this world, I leave no regrets. I'll leave something to remember so they won't forget." And I think that is what we want for each and every entrepreneur, SMME, especially our youth-owned businesses, to understand, and they should mimic. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Colin, for those insights. I think for me, there was one phrase that Sihle's Brew used when he said, "When you start a company, you are unemployed." I think a lot of people don't realize that, especially if you start a company and you've been working and you are used to an income on the 25th of the month. And I must say that's scary for a lot of people. And perhaps it talks to the earlier point that Dr. Remanence mentioned about fear of failure. You mentioned it as well. And I think for me also, in terms of just zooming in on that Sihle's Brew, it would be interesting to understand issues of succession for a business like that. So in summary, we're building up. There were the words resilience. There's fear of failure, but I think what we picked up there was passion and how passion can lead to success. Can we then move on to our next presentation, which takes us to the Flanders? And we'll hear more now about it being a breeding ground for entrepreneurship or fear of failure. I don't know if we have Professor Wouter van Bokhoven from Antwerp Business School is joining us online.
Hello, good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great, thank you. Yes, so lovely. Oh, now I see myself twice. So lovely to be here. Yeah, thanks for the great presentation that I just saw. I saw lots of parallels also that we could take to the Flemish context, I believe. What I want to talk about in the coming 15 minutes is rather about the Flemish situation. And indeed, fear of failure is one of the important aspects there. So I'll try to share my screen here. See whether that works. Sorry for that. Voilà. So if all is good, you should be seeing my screen now. So the question we ask is, Flanders, is it a breeding ground for entrepreneurship or rather fear of failure? This is a report about a relatively small study we did in 2019, but I think it's also relevant in this context. So the outline is first I'll go into that context behind fear of failure in entrepreneurship in Flanders a little bit. and then report the study and some brief takeaways. And then hopefully we have a little bit of space for discussion. So first of all, in terms of the context, one of the things that we as Belgians tend to still often pride ourselves on is that this one person about 2,000 years ago once said that of all of the Gauls, the Belgians are the bravest. And this was Julius Caesar. And when he said that the Belgians were the bravest, he actually meant we were a rowdy crowd. We were unmanageable from a Roman point of view. So in terms of integration, the hardest to integrate into the realm and so on. And actually, since in those 2,000 years, a couple of things have happened. Because if you look at it, and especially from the point of entrepreneurship, we as Belgians, and Flanders is not scoring that different from Belgium. Yeah, we do have a couple of issues with what you could call fear of failure, indeed. It seems to be also deeply rooted in our culture, so in both Flemish and Belgian culture. This does have a little bit to do that over those 2,000 years, Belgium has been ruled by other foreign powers. So we've been ruled by the Spanish, the Austrians, the French, the Germans, they tried twice, and so on. And that also meant that Belgium, as a relatively small country within the world, and of course also within Europe, we've always had to be very adaptive to others, and we couldn't really afford to take much risk because that was more often punished than rewarded, really. And we see that also in our culture to some extent. So if you look at uncertainty avoidance from the Hofstadter's model, Belgium has the 5th highest place worldwide in uncertainty avoidance. Since we all know that taking risks is a key component of entrepreneurship, and that is something that plays against us. Flanders has the 2nd highest fear of failure of 29 in protect everyone and everything and so on. It's really that gets institutionalized, and that takes a bit more time to also turn around. So fear of failure is a very important concept when you look at entrepreneurship. And as you can see there, I also included a small picture from the Global Entrepreneurship Monitor. These are results from 2015. But there you can see that where the black line is the global average, that we score quite a bit higher than that global average. However, it's not just a story of doom and gloom, because we do see quite a bit of entrepreneurship and successful entrepreneurship in Flanders. So what's really going on? And we wanted to provide some color into that often black and white debate with our study, because we see on the one hand that the newer generation is much more entrepreneurial, open to entrepreneurship, and much more ambitious when it comes to entrepreneurship. They score on average 8% higher than the other generations in our test population. And another thing, so in most recent years of the Global Entrepreneurship Monitor, that we have data from our 2015, but there you really saw in those last years that there was a big move, especially in Flanders, on the importance and the positive perception of entrepreneurship and innovation support. So in terms of innovation support, we get the highest rank in the Global Entrepreneurship Monitor. So some things are changes. Do these changes also have an impact on entrepreneurial behavior? And that's a big question we wanted to ask. We ask ourselves. Because you still see that we have the 3rd lowest appreciation for successful entrepreneurship, which was actually a factor that you could think could be changed quite faster. We also have low scores in terms of the overall entrepreneurial intent and ambition and so on. So are these in relation to failure, and what is then the impact of failure and so on? So we went ahead and studied failure. Just a couple of facts about failure. I won't go into all of them, so the presentation will be shared. First of all, fear of failure has a negative prediction, and this comes from scientific publication results, scientific study results. It has a negative prediction of the intention to start a business, and also on the career choice. So whether you will go for a self-employed or entrepreneurial career versus a more safe employee type of career. It also, well, and yeah, so the career choice aspect I've already mentioned, but there's also, if you look at the ambition, and there's a difference to make between intention and ambition. So entrepreneurial intention is I am actually planning or willing to start a business, while the ambition is then when you start a business, do you also have ambitious goals in terms of sales growth, in terms of the number of people you want to employ, and so on. So basically, on the economic impact you want to make as an entrepreneur. And there we see that fear of failure does not really have an influence. So once you make the choice for entrepreneurship, there it doesn't really have an impact anymore. But if you want to, so the key thing about fear of failure is if we want to impact having more people to be an entrepreneur, then it is an important factor to impact. And we'll also dive a bit deeper into some of the demographic aspects onto that, because we see gender and other aspects there as well. It's also driven by environmental factors. So if we think that we've just heard about is a country open to do business? What is the burden of administration and other aspects and so on? That also influences quite a bit the view of the opportunity structure. So that was an important determinant that we took with us. It's also driven, so this fear of failure is often also driven for a lack of understanding in our environment. And so if you have parents who are entrepreneurs, then you will get much more support from your environment. But typically, there's a strong correlation between a high fear of failure and people who don't find this kind of support in their surroundings. So that's also, if we want to manage it, that's an important mechanism how to do it. And then the perceived impact of external factors such as regulations, media, and financiers is also pretty important. Now, those regulations and so on, as I just said, that's also a bit driven by culture. So the regulations, they are, let's say, the weight of history that you carry with you from that culture. If we then want to manage it, it gets reduced by your personal convictions of the image of an entrepreneur. Do we see the Churchill is famous for saying that different people look at entrepreneurship in different ways. So for some, it is the predatory wolf that is only there to benefit from chances, opportunities in society for their own gain and so on. For government, it is the cow they seek to milk, and for actually it's only for some it is really seen as the sturdy horse that pulls the entire wagon. And I think there is something to say for that last view, that entrepreneurship, it's really where economic welfare is being created. And the more we try to put bounds on that, the more we put brakes on the potential of economic growth and welfare. Voila. And then if we look at, so this is, again, won't go into the entire model, but if you look at the conceptual model for behind our study, we looked at those context factors, which I've already touched upon to some extent. We also went and looked into what are certain drivers of this perception regarding failure. And so this perception regarding failure, it comes from somewhere. And so as already said, it does have to do with culture, with certain attitudes, as well as this context, the support we see in the context. And we looked into, different aspects of failure. So how, for instance, it has a cognitive aspect in terms of failure. Yeah, what kind of attributions we make to failure. So do we see this as necessarily a bad thing, or can it also be an opportunity? Can we see it as a learning opportunity, which is more, let's say, Anglo-Saxon way of looking at it? And so we've looked into cognitive and affective aspects of this perception regarding failure, and then we also looked into the consequences. Now, here are a couple of things I want to share. I know I won't be sharing the entire study, but here are a couple of things I wanted to share here. and hope that it incites some discussion. So first of all, we have in terms of the external influences on the left, we have those influences which were seen to really contribute to the willingness to take on, to start a business or to engage in entrepreneurial activity. And there we see that there's actually a top 5 which scores pretty high. So those measures to stimulate innovation, as I already said, and we score in an international perspective very high there, but that is really seen as a big support for innovation. Also, forms of financing. There are some issues with financing, but at least financing is widely available. So we just heard about early stage support and so on. That is something that in Belgium overall, for the small amounts you get, and in Flanders, of course, you get also quite some different channels and opportunities to find that funding. It's only once you try to scale, and there we still have a bit of a problem that you don't find those really big tickets in Flanders. We're improving, but it's still so, and that's of course important from the point of view of this creating economic welfare through entrepreneurship, because we know, of course, that the biggest economic impact is not made by early stage startups, but by the scale-ups. So strategically, that is still something to consider. Of course, banks. Belgium in general is one of the best countries for banking, so to get loans. It's easy to get loans in Belgium, just not so much as an entrepreneur always. And then, yeah, training and innovation kind of support. And so the subsidies as well as advice that is widely found in Flanders. On the other hand, there are also a couple of factors, and more of the burden of government and other aspects that negatively influence the willingness, the intent to entrepreneurial intent, as well as this fear of failure. And one of the most important ones there, and it's a bit paradoxical, but is this protection against the personal consequences of failure. And so once, if you fail in, this is not just Flanders, but in Belgium. So if you fail in Belgium, even though this was a Belgian data, Flemish data set, but the regulations are the same in Belgium. Failing in Belgium means that you get blacklisted. So if you go bankrupt, then you cannot get a loan anymore. You get on all sorts of blacklists, and that really has big personal consequences. And that's protection can be improved quite a bit. Secondly, the licenses, applications, and government administration are this really heavy burden, and there's still lots of work to be done there by the government to improve that, because in an international point of view, it scores second highest, and that is quite amazing in a country where, if you look at the third factor, we have one of the highest taxation rates. We have some of the most rigid rules for hiring and firing people and so on, but still this administration scores highest. So there's actually, so on the one hand, lots of support, but on the other hand, some of the breaks that still need to be worked on. Then, as said, we also wanted to provide some color, because this is the black and white story that you always hear between burden and support for entrepreneurship. But then if we look at dove more deeply into the concept of fear of failure, what are some of the things we got? And I want to focus here on a couple of especially the demographics. One of the things we see in this and other data sets is that women are underrepresented, especially when it comes to ambitious entrepreneurship. For instance, we also have this database on tech entrepreneur startups, and there in the founding teams, women only represent 8% of those startup teams. And that's counting very graciously, because that's even counting if one woman is represented in the startup team, it is classified as a startup team. So it's in essence, it's even lower. And we know, of course, there are some issues with getting more women into technical study directions and so on. But this really is a bit of an issue. So why is it that we don't get more women into entrepreneurship? And we studied a couple of hypotheses in this study. So is it due to just fear by itself? Is it because their context, there's still certain role patterns and other things that prevent them from doing this? And yeah, that's a bit outside of this study, but I also had a separate, I had a PhD doing a study on that. Is it because they define ambition a bit in a different way? And so these are three explanations which also find some support. So in our study, we indeed see that on average, there is still a significantly higher fear of failure in the female population than in the male population. And this is a general population of 1,000 Flemish people, 1,001 actually. And also the opportunity structure, which touches upon this second hypothesis. So this not having lots of room and support in their context for entrepreneurship, which we also see in the third bullet point there. So feeling less supported by their direct environments to go into entrepreneurship, which means that they're also less willing to take risks and less ambitious when they choose for entrepreneurship. They're more cautious. But again, as said, so this is already providing some color. So some insights into why is this rate of female entrepreneurship lower than male entrepreneurship, especially in the more ambitious kinds. So there is still something to do in the context. Even though I think in Belgium those role patterns aren't so highly prevalent. There's still, if you compare to Germany, for instance, the support for the free time you can take to after having a child and so on, that's more equally distributed between men and women in Germany than in Flanders. There's more time to do this and so on. So there's some action points that follow from that as well. A second. A second thing here is also in terms of just not this room for, but why is it that they are less ambitious? And that's what we found in that other study, that other PhD that we have, that if you look into female entrepreneurship, the motives for entrepreneurship are different. So they do want to go into entrepreneurship, but it's not always, again, in this very black and white, kind of masculine view of entrepreneurship as just making tons of money. It's often much more purpose-driven, and that's what we find in general with women. And lifestyle is also an important aspect. So they do want to get autonomy, the autonomy and but also making a contribution with their entrepreneurship. But that shouldn't be at all costs. It should not be at the cost of also still having a rich family life, a rich social life, and so on. So these are some things that we found, which are perhaps, if you look at it, more sustainable motives for entrepreneurship. So that is also something I think at both at the government, but also on a more societal level, a kind of a discussion we need to have. We've been focusing the past couple of decades, especially in research and policy, on supporting very highly ambitious entrepreneurship, but there is also something to say for these more sustainable forms of entrepreneurship, closer to home kinds of entrepreneurship as well. The impact of a professional category. So these are some things, I think most of them are quite, they supported most of our hypotheses. So on average, people who do make this choice to be self-employed or to be an entrepreneur, they have a higher preference and intention to do business. And to start a business. They have lower fear of failure, higher optimism, and more willingness to take risks. So they pretty much fit the pattern of what we expect from what differentiates an entrepreneur from a non-entrepreneur. As we see, and that was actually the biggest contributor, they do feel more supported by their environment to start a business. What was important here that they had a much more, and it was really a lot more negative perception of the opportunity structure. Oh no, sorry. So the negative perception of the opportunity structure was in one study very outspoken. In another study, which was more with the general group, it was not significant. So that was actually a big difference in the group, in the group of the entrepreneurs. So we had a study which was with a separate entrepreneurship panel, and there, indeed, it was quite clear that some of these aspects that were judged as positive by the other group were not so positive in the entrepreneur group. Impact of the education level, there again, I think they fit the pattern quite a bit to some extent, although there are also studies saying that, for instance, there is either no effect, and in some studies even a negative effect between the level of entrepreneurship and then both your success and willingness, intent to start a business. But what we do see here is that in the overall makeup, so looking at the attitudes and the fear of failure, that people with a higher level of education are on average more proactive in their careers, and they also have less fear of the external context. So the barriers in the external context. Sometimes it is because they might have a network in it, they might have a better view on how to overcome some of those barriers and so on. But they are less hindered, let's say, by this burden of administration, government, and other aspects. So this goes to speak for entrepreneurship, and especially in Flanders, it has a big impact because, and that's something, one of the last points I'll get to also, is that the kind of entrepreneurship we see in Flanders is closely connected to, let's say, the knowledge economy. There were also some differences between studies. So we had one study where they did feel more supported by their environment also, not just to study, but also to start a business. And they had lower levels of failure, but only in one study. So that was a bit surprising. And so we would have thought that education also takes away this fear of failure in general, but that doesn't seem to be the case overall. It does seem to be the case in what I said earlier on this, seeing how to overcome external barriers. That is really helped by education. So education does have an important positive impact on willingness to start a business and reducing fear of failure. And then, in terms of the age category, there were some things, again, some patterns which could be expected, like, for instance, the young people, well, you could classify them as also a little bit more naive. So they were not hindered so much by the negative, by the external barriers that they saw. They had a lower risk of so no, they didn't have a lower risk fear of failure. So that was a surprising aspect. But they had higher levels of ambition, which is also good because that was something where Flanders historically scored pretty low on. So we see in that younger generation that they're less encumbered by those external barriers, perhaps because they don't know them just yet. They haven't ran into some of those walls just yet, and they are more ambitious. What was indeed strange is that fear of failure was actually lower in the older category. So 55 in the 55 plus category, there was a lower fear of failure, which is was not entirely what we expected. On the other hand, then the ambition was also lower in that category. So somehow making a match between those two might be quite good. That is also one of the recommendations we made. And also the opportunity structure in Flanders is viewed more positively by people, by especially the older people. Again, not that it was viewed very negatively by these other categories, but it may be some experience aspect of that they already have gained some experience in how to overcome those barriers. Voilà. So what are some takeaways? And I will restrict myself to just three takeaways. So first of all, when we look at this context of Flanders having this historical, this weight of history a little bit from its culture. So there is this heavy weight of history, but we are quickly catching up, and especially the younger generation is providing a lot of hope in that respect. There's also a strong Flanders is mostly strong because if we look at total entrepreneurial activity, which is quite striking. So in an international perspective, if you look at our total early stage entrepreneurial activity and also the established TEA, then you see that we score in an international perspective very low. So the black lines here on the right, they represent the global averages, and the blue lines, they represent the Flemish and Belgium average, the Belgium average in this case. But if you look at then entrepreneurial employee activity rate, so which basically stands for the level of entrepreneurship, there we are one of the leading countries. So it's not that we're not innovative, it's not that we don't want to entrepreneur, if that is can be seen as a verb. But we do like to do so in a given context. So we will rather be entrepreneurs than entrepreneurs. That's a general finding. That's a historic thing that we see in Flanders, and then hopefully this newer generation is also going more for external entrepreneurship than just entrepreneurship. And the thing that you then have in Flanders is also that those areas where we have then, because we have lower TEA rates, but those areas where we are higher, there we are world leading often. So look in biotech, look in what's also up and coming. What I've been studying the past couple of years is also in the ports industry. We have a very important, the second largest port in Europe. Which also, again, then translates into providing a more supportive environment for entrepreneurs. And that's also one of the messages, especially for Flanders, is that we need to focus really on certain industries where we can, and there we can really play Champions League. There we can really be top notch. But we have to be true to ourselves. So we have to know this cultural burden that we're dragging along, and not think that we can just do it everywhere. We don't have a big home market advantage, and we have a rather small market on the one hand. But on the other hand, that also means, and this is again feeding into why we are strong in these knowledge-driven types of entrepreneurship, that if you can make it here, you can almost make it everywhere. In Flanders and in Belgium, in extension, it's a relatively small but very complex market. So once you figured out how to deal with all of these complexities, then you are better armed against also going international. The big disadvantage is, of course, that you don't have a big home market which feeds expansive growth in the early stages. So that is something which is very typical of Flemish entrepreneurship. It's very B2B oriented, quite kind of niche and highly knowledge driven. And then a last thing that was also the recommendation, one of the recommendations we made. There is a lot of opportunity we see in coupling this young generation with a big drive and big ambition that we haven't seen before in Flanders just yet, with the experience of an older generation, which has a much better view of this complex field and so on. So if we can match those two, that's really a recipe for success, I would say, in Flanders. And that was actually my last takeaway. So I don't know whether there are any questions.
I think, yeah. Thank you, Prof, for sharing those experiences. Specifically, I was looking at some of the similarities you have with South Africa. There are a couple I looked at when you mentioned how risk-taking is punished than rewarded. The second is, I think, something common with South Africa is the whole concept where you were elaborating on fear of failure, of the consequences of failure, in terms of, for instance, where entrepreneurs get blacklisted and then find it difficult to raise finance. And then the third one for me was in terms of the underrepresentation of women, which I found quite surprising, especially in terms of entrepreneurship as a choice. The one difference, though, and I think people in the room will agree with me, is when you said it's quite easy to get loans in Belgium. So I'm sure I'd encourage most of us to move to Belgium and go and start businesses there, because the experience in South Africa is very different. But thank you for those insights. What we'll do now is, whilst the prof is online, you can pose questions, but we're also taking other questions that have come in from online and from the floor before we break for tea. Any questions, comments?
I see one raised hand.
There are some questions online, not specifically for the prof, but for other panelists. Shall we take them now? Or
Yeah, please.
Okay. So there's the first question is, how can young emerging farmers access seed funding? And the second question, and I'm going to read it out, says, I appreciate the agnostic approach, but are there specific interventions for Durban and KwaZulu-Natal youth-owned businesses? This is coming from a pandemic, civil unrest, and recent floods perspective. So those are the two questions online.
Can you bring the mic here? Pulani would like to say something.
Thank you so much. And thank you, Prof, for that presentation. I think my interest is really around stimulating entrepreneurship within academic institutions. In South Africa, yes, we are talking about that, but it's very, very difficult to integrate entrepreneurship across vocational studies. So you would find business business development integrated within economic studies only. And as a country, we need to make sure that that is integrated throughout these faculties. So I really need to understand how, as a country, they manage to achieve that.
Thanks.
Okay, if I can go ahead on this question.
One, Prof, just in case it's for you, and then you can come in.
I can confirm that the question is for him. My name is Fred Mahato from the Franchise Association of South Africa. Prof, I saw in one of your slides that the failure driver is culture of individualism. What is of concern for me is that are entrepreneurs open to investments, or is that a general feeling that your business is your business? Because I think this is one of the issues that we are facing in the country, as we have also seen with Sihle. So we don't know whether is he open for investments or not.
Okay. Well, I think first of all, the individualism and how that relates and potentially drives fear of failure is that you have an advantage in collectivist cultures. So mostly southern and eastern parts of the world have a more collectivist view of everything, basically. So of society and of the economy, more family-driven and so on. Is that in an individualist culture, you don't have a large base of support. So I really like this saying. So I'm a professor of ecosystems, and I always abuse this saying of it takes a village to raise a child. Well, it also takes a village to raise, to transform, to start a business, and so on. So for entrepreneurs, not having that kind of culture that it's the entire family, neighborhood, and so on, which supports and so on, that is actually one of the things that contributes to a higher fear of failure, because we don't have that base of support. Now, to come back then on the latter part of your question regarding being open to investments, yes, indeed. So individualism, it does lead to seeing the business as it's your own property. So I think there's also different views on property rights and how absolute they are then sometimes. And at least in Belgium, and Flanders is not much different from overall Belgium in that respect, is that that's because of that we still don't get that. It's sometimes better to own 10% of something which is worth billions than to own 70% of something which has much less growth potential. So by opening up to investments, that is indeed a driver of growth. Because if you want to do it with your own money, and if you want to keep all control, then investors are not really willing to come to you if you're not willing to share equity and so on. And that is a big factor for ambitious entrepreneurship, for high growth entrepreneurship.
And then there was the second question, Pulani's question.
You mean about the academic entrepreneurship? Or?
Correct, yes.
Yes. Well, how have we tried to do that as a country? I'm not saying that we are so successful in it, but we do have some success stories. We have a really successful academic incubator. I think it's one of the highest scoring academic incubators in the world, the I Make I Start one. And what is shared across those stories is, on the one hand, verticalization. So to really have an impact from academic entrepreneurship, you need to understand that there is a big difference between innovation and entrepreneurship. Innovation is coming from knowledge, technology, product towards market. But entrepreneurship is rather starting the other way around, seeing what are the big issues in a market, what are some issues that might even generate, be the source of new markets, and then orienting innovation towards that. So this verticalization, meaning a focus on specific industry verticals, but it doesn't have to necessarily be an old industry vertical. Like the one I've been studying the last 2-3 years has been on smart ports, which is the combination of new technologies in the old port sector. But the biotech case is another good example of how we succeeded that by focus on one vertical where we have a high R&D intensity in Flanders, where we even have production sites and so on. And if you don't have that chain near you, then it's very hard to really, to break into some of those supply chains. So in Belgium is a country which is very well known for its capabilities in pharma, biotech, and so on. So if you come also from Belgium with a startup in that, you immediately get more legitimacy outside in the world than in another industry. So it is there's an image aspect to it, there's the chain aspect. And then another thing which I saw, a second thing that's also being done and that leads to success is, again, starting from the same proposition that the entrepreneurship starts from market opportunities rather than technological development. So technology is just an enabler. What they called sort of reverse incubation. So instead of incubating ideas, confronting these scientists, these entrepreneurial-oriented scientists, with people from the market, and that's a little bit how a nuclear process also works. So you let these people from the market come in with their ideas, with their opportunities, with their also concerns, and then having them interact with the scientists. That is often a nice source of ideas which also have the potential to scale up.
Thank you, Professor. Shall we then move on to the other questions? And I'll ask Colin, is there another one? Oh, okay. Another one for you, Prof, before we move on.
Thank you. Prof, here's a question from Mojalefa Mohoto. They write, has you acknowledged the punishment linked to taking risks? Are there any systems that one could put in place to cushion those that are ambitious to start, just as a way of assurance?
That's a very good question. If we solve that one, that's definitely gonna help our economies forward for sure. Are there some best practices that we do see? Well, I think we mostly see initiatives on the side of at least providing those entrepreneurs with sufficient resources. It's often said that about a third of entrepreneurs or startups fail due to lack of resources. So we see, especially on that side, that it's rather decreasing the probability that they fail because of these resource issues. We see lots of initiatives there, but cushioning when they fall, that's actually a good question. And it's a very tough one to solve because, first of all, it really goes back to your culture. Is it in your culture to see failure as just a thing of life, or is it something which is bad? So if your entire culture still sees it that way, then it's very hard to get financial institutions, business partners, and others to change their views on that. So I think a lot of it is also about working on that deeper level of awareness, culture, and so on. And then again, cushioning, I think there's just some legal aspects of what you can do of protecting entrepreneurs. So the legal protection, that is something you can work on faster, you could say. There's also the ecosystem. So what also happens often is that if you fail for whatever reason, but there were some good aspects in what you do, that often there are other entrepreneurs or other established businesses at least who see the value in some of the IP or other things that you've made and who are still willing to buy that out. So that is also something you can try to organize a little bit more, I guess. So what is it? To systematically organize entrepreneurs in sectors, in specific sectors, more towards takeovers. So taking over those businesses which are struggling. And often we see many examples of those who then get a really good second life, so who are really successful in their second life, you could say. So that's another way I see. But other than that, I haven't really found that many solutions. I don't know whether in South Africa you've already developed some.
Thanks, Prof. There's another question for you.
Yeah, the question is directed to Ausliseho. I am Zolisanani Ngobongwana from SIFA, Youth Challenge Program Manager. Ausliseho, one of the things that I've picked, I'm not sure if it has been picked by your research, the matter of access to information and also the matter of connectivity, because from my experience, most SMEs and informal sector business owners, they tend to struggle on those terms. And also Bracolen from CEDA, I concur with you in terms of there is access to funding, there is money available, but in most cases, most of our SMEs struggle with at the pre-investment stage. I think if we can focus more on pre-investment, we can get a lot of successful entrepreneurs.
Thanks. Can I ask Colin to answer first, and then Liseho and the colleagues from SIFA on that funding question, please?
Thank you. I think when the floods hit and just after the announcement came that the DSBD together with CEDA will then look at flood relief specifically for the Eastern Cape as well as for KZN. We started then engaging with entrepreneurs and SMMEs that was, affected by the floods. We have then had people apply for funding. So there's a process that people had to go through where we went out, we checked, we made sure that whatever was lost or damaged within, as the floods occurred, that we were able to assist them, especially the ones where there was no insurance. Because a lot of the people, especially our constituency, did not have insurance that would cover what they had. We were in KZN last week or the week before with the ministers' roadshows, as well as CEDA hosted its annual stakeholders forum, and as part of that, we then went and we gave whatever people applied for as part of the flood relief. What we can do is I can share the details of our KZN, because I think that question came from KZN specifically. Our KZN offers details with them. They can also go onto the CEDA website and they will find the KZN details there. They are then welcome to, speak to the KZN provincial office just to find out whether they are still able to apply, because the funding that was available, I think we actually spent all of it. But obviously, I do not want to say no, do not contact the provincial office, because maybe there's something that they could look at. So I would say, let's rather make them, contact the provincial office and see how best we can assist them moving forward. So if I could just give the email address as well as the number for KZN, and then maybe it can be posted onto that questions, then that will help.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Good suggestion.
Sorry, just to jump in. It's in connection with, because Colin spoke specifically to the flooding, but in connection with the unrest, there was funding program that was done in response to the last July unrest that were particularly in KZN and greater parts of Gauteng. It was called the Business Recovery Program, and it had offered a funding of up to a maximum of 2.5 million, 50% being a grant and 50% being a loan. It was a time-bound program because it was responding to a particular crisis. In terms of what can be done now for those who are still trying to recover from the effects of the unrest, I think it was within the same question, so as well we would include the CIFA KZN contact details to see what can still be done outside that program. Thanks.
So the question was on access to information and connectivity. And maybe I need to just give so the study was based on the analysis that we did, was extracted from the FinScope MSME survey of 2020, which is a research that we conduct as an organization, as and when we have funding to do that. Yes, you're correct. SMMEs don't know where to get these things that are there. They have no information about it. But also where they do, they don't know what the requirements are for them to be able to access those things. From a connectivity perspective, I think we all know, so this was not highlighted in the study, but I think we all know in South Africa, so in our consumer surveys, we do pick up that connectivity, particularly in our rural communities, is a struggle, which means it would have an impact on those that live in those areas as and when they need to connect in order to access any form of support.
Thanks, Liseho. One last question, I think we're running, is it, can we hold the thoughts and carry this forward after tea when we have our panel discussion. I'm just mindful that we might have a runaway program and then not finish in time because we lost some time at the beginning. But just to give a big thank you, and let's give a round of applause to all our panelists and for the contributions, both in person and virtually. My suggestion, Odette, how many minutes? At 12. So if we can be back here at 12, we're taking a short comfort break, and then we will dive straight into the panel, which will be facilitated by Paul. Thank you.
So go with the physical panel members you have. Throw it open to let's find solution. So counting down.
Welcome back, everyone, for the afternoon session. This will be an interactive session. My name is Mpho Tseole, as per the agenda, and I will be facilitating this panel discussion. The theme of the panel discussion, as per our agenda, is our panel members to share ideas, lessons, experiences, and perspectives on how to unlock innovative finance for the youth sector. Now, the format of our session, how it will go, I will introduce our panel members. I will then give each panel member an opportunity, approximately 3 to 4 minutes, hopefully shorter, to share their ideas. We are more on a practical perspective. And then what we will do after they've shared their practical experiences, we will then open up, hopefully in 20 minutes, questions from the floor. And what we would like to encourage from the floor, including members who are joining us virtually, is that your questions should be posed to the solutions instead of reiterating the challenges, because we've already gone through our challenges. We've had desktop researches, we've had desktop reviews. So I think we've had enough of the challenges that we experience in this sphere. And also, if there might be any challenges that have not been expressed in the morning session or in the previous dialogue, you are welcome to bring up those challenges. However, it should be followed up by a suggestion in terms of a solution. All right. Without any waste of time, let's introduce our panel members. All of our panel members are joining us in person, and thank you for making it. I almost thought we're not going to have our chairs full. And by the way, my interest in the session, I also have my own selfish interest. I come from the rural province of the Northwest, and I'm hoping that I will be able to take something back to our rural youth-owned businesses. As somebody has already mentioned before tea break, with regards to information and connectivity. And those are some of the key challenges that rural businesses are faced. On my right, starting with Zolisani Ngobonwana. Hopefully I've spelled it correctly.
It's Zolisanani.
Yes?
Ngobongwana.
Ngobongwana. You can hear he's a guy from the Northwest. Thanks for that, Zolisani. Zolisani is representing SIFA. And then we have Cheryl Jacob. Cheryl is from E Squared Investments. And then next to Cheryl, we have Ms. Itumeleng Mutlawane from Youth Sounding Board. And then next to Itumeleng, we have Elvis Sakaulelo. Did I spell it correctly? All right. Practice make perfect. Elvis is from Kasi Entrepreneurs. And those who were with us in the morning session, you may have seen Colin. Colin is joining us again as a panel member from CEDA. Thank you. And each member has a roving or a mic. If not, I think you will share your mics from your colleagues. And with that, I would like to take this and give an opportunity to Zolisanani. I got it right now. Ah, perfect. And Zolisanani, if you could, maybe in 2 minutes or 3, share ideas, lessons, experiences, and perspectives on how to unlock innovative finance for the youth sector.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Zolisanani Ngobongwana from SIFA Youth Challenge Fund Program Manager. On my side, or collaboration, for me, it's one of the things that, as stakeholders, we must focus on. We have a lot of programs in South Africa, but everyone is doing their own thing. There is no collaboration. And secondly, as my colleague, part of the panel has alluded also, pre-investment is quite needed, especially on the youth space, because most of our youth start businesses because they are unemployed. So there is no what you call mentoring and stuff. The person finds out things as they go. So if us, SIFA and CEDA can collaborate more on that side, especially on the side of incubation, I believe a lot of youth incubation is needed, because one of our challenges when it comes to when the first leg of the application was opened was the quality of the applications that we received, especially in terms of the documents. Sorry, you'll find out that the person just submitted the things for the sake of submitting so that their names can be inside when the window closes for application. So if us and CEDA can collaborate more and work more on each other and work more and try to help those guys that showed interest in the fund, but then they were not yet funding ready, I believe we can unlock a lot of potential in terms of the youth. And also, as I looked at incubation, because on my past experiences also, we as the entrepreneurial environment in South Africa, we have to be intentional of what we do. We don't put up an incubation because there are funds available for incubation. We have to put up incubation because we want an end product with the entrepreneur. Because you will find out that someone is in 2 or 3 different incubation. And I always say that you cannot be, because for me, incubation is like a baby that is inside the womb. You cannot be in 3 different rooms at the same time. That's that's quite impossible. So you'll find that person is in those, and also the end product of incubation is for you to graduate, for you to go out there and make it by yourself with the skills that were imparted to you by incubation. But then if you are in those different ones, you are just there for benefits. So also maybe we change the mentality on those things, that incubation is not for you to benefit, to have office space, to be paid for, the printing and stuff. Incubation is to be there to make you ready for the outside world. Those are the ideas that I feel we can work on as South Africa, or as this value chain for entrepreneurs.
Great. Thanks for sharing, Zolisanani. And we will move on to Cheryl Jacob. Cheryl, kindly share with us what lessons and gems that you can give to South African youth.
Thank you so much. Thank you for this opportunity. I think I must just paint a picture of where I come from. So E-Squared Investments sits within a philanthropy group, so it's the Alan Gray Philanthropy Group. And I think when I share this example, it must be that I'm speaking to funders and financiers who have access to funding, and how do we have a responsibility in this ecosystem. And I thought I'd zone in on innovation. I think we're talking about innovative financing here, and I think sometimes we forget that innovative financing means just that, innovation in the space. And innovation means a new idea, a different way of doing things. And I think we forget that old ways don't open new doors. And I think for me, in the space in which I work and the funds in which I get out to communities or to organizations or to entrepreneurs themselves, we think about what is the way in which we come alongside and understand your context so that we craft this financing to meet your need. And I think when we think about providing funding, we think about blanket solutions. And one way is not going to fix all problems. And so with innovative financing, I think that's what we need to zone in. What is the innovation in the financing system currently? And then how do we hack the solutions so that we do provide the right solutions to the right problems? I thought I'd tell you a story, just given that we learn best by stories. And so at E-Squared, during COVID, during the pandemic, a lot of funders were pooling their funding, and we knew that. We knew everyone was putting their money together, and then they were thinking about how does this funding go out and solve the problems that the pandemic is presenting us with. And as E-Squared, we managed to relook at our budget, and we found 30 million rand, and we said it's not a lot of money, so what do we do? Do we pool it with everybody else, and so we make the pot bigger, or do we sit back and think, is there something we could do with this? And having taken a mapping view of what's happening out there, we realized there's loads of money available, and it's going to go to those businesses that are struggling, and government has a lot of programs going on. So what do we do? What is our responsibility? And so as a team, we sat back and we thought about it through an innovative lens, and we said, there must be a lot of SMMEs out there that has innovations that are now going to come of age, given the pandemic. What can we do about supporting them? And so we developed at the time the Innovative Relief Fund, which is what we called it at E-Squared, and we put out a call to say, if you're doing an innovation that you feel at this moment is dealing with a problem that COVID is presenting us with, send an application to us. And as a team, we had to sit down and think about, how do we lessen the barriers? We're going to get inundated with applications, but how do we make this as simple that we ourselves can go through these applications and suss out the ones that we can fund, because we only have 30 million. And it took us a long time, to be honest. And so I think one of the first points I want to land is that when you're doing this, it's not a quick fix solution. It's going to take time. And do you have the appetite to have patient capital, that you can actually sit back and say, let's do this and figure it out right, so that when we do go to market, we're going to go with the solution that we know is fixing actual problems. So that was the first thing. We got in a number of applications, and we got together an ICN investment committee, and we went through some of the applications. We got in hundreds of them, but we could only invest in 8. And of that 8, 5 of them came back to us for follow-on funding. So any of you work in the funding space or the investment space, you would know that you have to gain quite a bit of traction to come back for follow-on funding. And so we were quite proud of that. 5 out of 8 came back to us for follow-on funding. Of that 5, 2 of them were able to launch Series A rounds, which means that our funding became catalytic funding, which is the other point I want to land. For those of us who do have access to finance, how are we using our financing to become catalytic capital? That when we get in there for seed funding, that we're helping these SMMEs, entrepreneurs to actually gain the traction they need, so that then they're able to then look into the ecosystem for other funding available. I think it was you who said, and it was Colin who said, there's lots of funding available. It's the access to it. And it's so where are we playing? How are we being smart about how we're crafting innovative financing to meet the need? and then fast track those entrepreneurs who have good ideas but are unable to get the pre-seed or the seed funding that they need. And then I thought I'd just tell you, from those who got, who's raising funding currently, I wanted to zone in on one particular one. One of them is a rural SMME, actually, who was operating just on his own, doing his own thing, kind of most rural entrepreneurs, right? Like just do their thing, get out there and say, okay, I'll figure it out. For my community, I think I have the solution. And I had found him just before COVID, and he had launched the first online grocery store for rural communities in rural KZN. And we were able to invest in him during the COVID relief fund, with our COVID relief fund, and he gained quite a bit of traction. Let me show you how much traction that was. In March 2020, he was turning over 350,000. March 2022, 1.2 million. So that's that's double almost, right, year on year. And so that shows how catalytic funding can actually open doors. He's managing at this very moment to employ 29 young people in a rural community. Of those 29, 20 are women, and it's their first time that they actually had a job. So if we know what the rural context is, there's so many young people who move to urban areas because you're looking for a better opportunity. But the number of jobs they find is minimal, and they live in really undignified spaces when they do come to urban areas. And so I think there's problems that are being solved by young entrepreneurs in the communities in where they exist. But it's our role as financiers to think about what is the innovative financing mechanisms that we're using. Because that startup was so nascent, we couldn't just go to him and say, we want to give you equity. Like, we'll give you this money, we're going to take equity. For us, it was, what is the right financing mechanism that we use to support you? And a convertible loan was the right mechanism to use for them. It gave them the runway they needed. It gave them the opportunity to really do the things they needed to do to grow in their organization. And then they were able to then come back to us and say, we need follow-on funding, and then we can talk about this convertible loan. So I think it's also about the funding mechanisms that we're using at the right time, depending on where that company or that SMME or that entrepreneur is. And I think so many times we just have this is the solution for all of you. And we don't spend the time understanding what stage are you at and what is the right mechanism we use in order to help you grow. Because when you grow, you unlock jobs, you unlock the economy, and you win and I win. And so I think for me, the challenge is to think about how we're using catalytic capital and how are we making sure that we're journeying with entrepreneurs to understand where they're at and then provide them the right innovative financing for the point at what they're at. Thank you.
A mouthful, Cheryl. Thanks for sharing. And I mean, one speaker before T mentioned about information accessibility. This is the type of practical examples and case studies that, if shared across South Africa, we can be able to learn from them. Thanks for sharing. And with that, I'd like to give Mayor Itumeleng an opportunity to share from the Youth Sounding Board.
So much. Okay. I'm going to share from my experiences of being a young person that is organizing other young people and mentoring young people within the Eastern Cape and that rural context. I think this is something that has been mentioned throughout the day, that youth is not a homogeneous group. And so when we're talking about young people, we can never have a blanket approach. I was glad to hear the SBD talk about segmentation of funding, because that was going to be the premise of my argument today, that young people that, as we've said, that young people form up to 62% of the population right now. And that means that in the young people, there is women, there is young people with disabilities, there is young people from rural areas. And what we have seen as the trend is that young people that actually get support are those that are in capital cities, those that already have some like source of funding to be able to access opportunities. And then we leave out those young people who it will take much more funds to include. Because if we are going to include young people that are marginalized by the system, it definitely takes more resources, more thoughts, more consultation, and more engagement. And I think that the first thing that we need to do is to realize that there are disfranchised young people in different parts of South Africa, and funding needs to be able to be tailored towards those young people and their needs. I want to present here as a solution the inclusive digital inclusion. I know this is controversial, particularly for rural areas, where a lot of people will say rural areas don't have access to internet. I've just had Cheryl share a beautiful story of a young man in rural KZN who had an app that was successful. My brother, during COVID, ran a successful business of live streaming funerals for those who could not get to those funerals. And it was a successful business. We are in deep rural Eastern Cape. And so I do think that it's one of the things that I think people don't actually go to rural areas and rural people and consult to actually find what are the challenges with this internet access, because it can't be a blanket approach to say young people in rural areas don't have internet access, right? So we've seen that during COVID, there's been a move from Skype to Zoom. We've seen that move from Zoom to to Google Meets. We've seen WhatsApp actually creating space where 8 to 10 people can meet. So those are less data consuming, and they actually are accessible to young people. We just need these big corporates that are funding young people to come closer to the spaces that we can access. I remember we had a big chat about Microsoft Teams and how inaccessible that platform is for young people in rural areas because it's data heavy. And the people that we were talking to were arguing that this is actually more safe. We cannot have this discussion in a WhatsApp call. But what was convenient at the time was a WhatsApp call. So what I'm trying to say to you is that excluding young people will not be, including young people will not be very comfortable sometimes, and we will need to have compromises. And then the second thing that I think when we're unlocking innovative funding for young people in rural areas, we are curing is the rural-urban migration, right? The rural-urban migration is something that has decreased the market a lot for young people that are in rural areas because of the economy that's not being taken advantage of. Just before I came here, I was listening to our premier in the Eastern Cape who was saying that they will only fund young people who are in the agriculture sector, young people who have already established something. We need to see something before we give you funding. And I was thinking that is the very first barrier that young people face in order for them to be able to enter the market of agriculture, because you need to showcase something. And that something is not there. Young people are hungry, they are unemployed, they're fresh out of school, they don't have any resources. I was thinking to myself, they were like, there are NYDA offices. To go to an NYDA office that is closest to me, I need to travel 4 hours. I need to pay 360 rands. So that on its own is a barrier that young people face. And I present agriculture as one of the sectors that I think Black women, young people who are in rural areas, can be able to be emancipated through. There is a lot of land that is not being used. Right now, that land is contributing to climate change because it's getting arid because of the continued unuse of that land. But lastly, I think it's just in my observation and like organizing young people politically that you don't see a representation of young people where decisions are made. I'll make an example with this dialogue that we're in. At the first, when there was presentation and when the policies were being presented, it was slightly the older generation. But now we are consulting, then we see faces of young people. So that is the issue, right? The issue is that we are not there when solutions are being crafted and presented. We're only brought into the table as we're brought into the table for consultation. We're brought into the table only to speak when a solution has already been crafted. We want to be part of solutions and policy making from right at the beginning until the end. When I say the end, I mean the monitoring and evaluation of these policies, because what we see happening is that policies are presented to us and we never get back what how effective that policy was. How many young people did it reach? We only get to hear the one or two story that will make it out, and the hundreds of young people that have been excluded by these policies, we don't get to hear their stories. And I do think that my chat is basically that we need to include young people because they're not empty vessels that don't have solutions themselves. In order for us to be innovative, we need to segment the group of young people, and we need to be intentional about segmenting those young people because of the different segments that we belong to. We are women, we are young people with disabilities, and we are young people that come from different sectors of life. And then the last thing that I wanted to present that I saw as part of that the commissioner for DG INPA had presented for us when we were doing the consultation last year to try and find out why are young people not having startups, why are they, what are some of the ways that we can encourage? And this thing about competition and funding came up a lot, where young people feel like there are big corporates that they are competing with, because when you speak about the SMMEs, you speak about a very broad category that has different types of businesses. And I do think that it's important that we fence funding for young people specifically to eliminate competition with other big corporates and well-established and well-established businesses. And I think that will then decrease what we've seen, which is the need to formalize that has been killing businesses. Because if a business that is at its infancy stage is forced to formalize, the chances of that business surviving are not very high. What needs to happen to those businesses, seed funding and mentoring, because like Kupoti said, that young people cannot belong to 3 incubators. So that means that we have to strengthen the mentoring and tailor it to those businesses. Thank you so much.
Thank you for that contribution, Mate Dumeling. I think you've raised key and pertinent issues about the criteria we use. And some of the issues you raised, I've already seen them in the draft policy. And chances are, if something does not happen before the end of November, they may go through and we may find ourselves with the same challenges. The issue of formalization came across in the research document and in the presentation that it's an impediment to access to funding, but there is a different perspective. So I'm hoping the department has taken note, and if anything is not clear, Mate Dumeling is here, you can consult with her. All right, with that said, I would like to take this opportunity and give over to Mr. Elvis of Kasi Entrepreneurs.
Good afternoon, everyone. I think we have woke young people nowadays, and well done up to you. I think she raised quite some of the most important issues that we actually get to face. And I'm going to try to actually summarize and also not actually repeat what she has said, but just make sure that I point out what actually needs to happen. Cheryl, when she mentioned innovative financing, I think it is quite important that people will go and actually understand back to where the SMEs are coming from. I'm from a rural village in Limpopo, in Polokwane. I run Ekasi Entrepreneurs, and Ekasi Entrepreneurs is one of the biggest network of township entrepreneurs and rural area entrepreneurs in South Africa. We are here now in Arcadia at a hotel, but you never get to actually go back into the township and understand what the issues that SMEs actually go through. And an IT business in the township and an IT business in the CBD or in an urban area are completely different businesses. They have different issues and they run their businesses differently. So when I looked at the whole thing, is that we tried to put a bandage on a key source that is actually, we're not dealing with the inner part. And a lot of policies that actually have been drafted during apartheid era, especially when it comes to the operations in the township businesses, is that we are caged in where we live in. We're not actually allowed to run businesses in the township. A few years ago, we worked with the Western Cape Economic Development Department, where we actually abolished about 144 policies that were infringing on the development and the growth of SMEs. You can't be having a a traffic cop's actually going to take mama on the street that is actually selling the cabbage or something like that and taking their stock? How do you think that they want to be able to survive when it comes to that? But the reason they do that is because they're just only implementing what is in the policies that have been drafted during apartheid era and during the time when we're not there. Number two, I think we need to look into an element of compliance. So now, we talked about formalization, informal economy, formal businesses, and stuff like that. There are, as I said, I'm from the rural villages in Limpopo. My mother was a sewer, right? Those kind of things. My mother was making a lot of money when I was in grade 9, 10, 11. She was making 40 to 50,000 rand alone on a monthly basis. That's why she was able to take her kids to universities and be able to give them a better life. So my mother never actually get to a point of saying, I want to formalize, I want to be able to be registered, I want to be able to do that. We need to now understand what there are businesses that actually do not want to formalize. They want to be able to run and operate in a way that they're operating. But what they need is support when it comes to infrastructures. And when I say infrastructures, it may be an element of connectivity when it comes to internet. It may be an infrastructure when it comes to an environment, an enabling environment to ensure that they're able to operate. So funding is not necessarily to fund an SME, but it may be funding an infrastructure that enables that SME to actually grow and actually develop where it actually want to be able to go. The second part is, the third part is that when it comes to, I've visited a couple of CEDA's incubations, and especially the one in Seshangube. It's actually quite nice. A co-production space, especially in manufacturing. There's a lot of incubators out there where there are hubs where we just go and sit down and we're expected to come with our laptops, be trained into work. Some of our SMEs actually do not work on laptops. I've invested in a farm in Limpopo. And I've worked with a lot of farmers, and some of their needs, it's not necessarily to say I need a production space. So some of their needs is not about needing a working space to sit down and be on the laptop. Some of their needs is creating a value chain within the agriculture and agro-processing. How do we ensure that a farmer that is farming tomatoes can be able to supply an SME that is actually creating tomato sauce, and that person can be able to use a township logistics business to be able to make sure that it gets to a market, whether it be a spaza shop or to a farmer's market or a specific retail shop. So now, when it comes to the element when you say innovative funding, and it's also come to the point of saying it's not about the SME as per se, it's about how do we create a value chain that will be able to be supported. And because, I mean, we get to plant, I mean, I'm with Winadi here, she owns about 100 hectares of land in Marble Hall. But with that 100 hectares of land, she's not able to irrigate because she does not have irrigation systems. She's not able to, after she's planted, it's a matter of how do we move our goods to a specific market? How do we make sure that we have access to markets to make sure that we sell our products? So that's an issue because I have chickens. I mean, we have about 15,000 chickens every cycle. There's no abattoir in the whole of Capricorn district. So now, if ever we're talking about people must go into farming, people must go into production, we're talking about what people are doing, a lot of resellers that aren't necessarily producing products. But are we creating an enabling environment to ensure that these SMEs, whether it be from urban areas or the rural villages or the township, they have that spaces to be able to produce? Are we saying that we should always be operating in our kitchens? Because some of them we can't actually go and actually open our own big factories, but you can be able to co-produce in a specific environment as opposed to a hub. I touched on access to markets, I touched on infrastructure. So now it comes down to measures, monitoring and evaluations. So you're right. I think there are a lot of programs that come and go. There are a lot of funding that comes and go, and you get to be consulted to say, how do you go about doing this? We tell you how to do it, and then you go and implement it, but then you never actually tell us. What is the impact? What worked and what hasn't worked? How do we now make sure that we work on what has not worked to be able to be better and improve and add more on what is working? There was time where we talked about social bonds, where government will actually work with civil societies to say, you know what, when we talk about impact projects in the township, in the rural villages, when those projects are impactful, how do we scale them to make sure that they get to be impactful in those communities? So that element is also an element of innovative funding, because if a bank funds you and you don't succeed, the government can be able to pay it back. But you need to make sure that they need to make sure that you actually succeed so that they can be able to fund you more and more. So that is the relationship that we need to have between SMMEs, civil societies, banks, SMEs, civil societies, banks, and government. To say the issue is not about government only bringing in finance, but it's also about how do we ensure that collaborating together, we create an open doors for the SMEs to actually create their own finance through access to market and through selling. Because most of us, it's not like we want money like from bank. What we're saying is that create an enabling environment for us to be able to operate, for us to be able to produce, for us to be able to be made ready before we can be able to sell our products, because from the profit of the sales, that's when we can be able to grow, that's when we can be able to make sure that we get from one point to the other. Just to iterate, so some of our projects that we ran, just to answer to the whole element of innovative funding, and how after failing from actually getting funding from different private sectors and government institutions, how we're able to actually go about doing it. With regards to the farms, so we are in a stockfell element where we put between 250 to R1 million each, with about 6-7 of us. What needed to happen is that we knew we had land, but we knew we had everything. This is the money that we have. But because I do not have the whole issue of people not having the credit record, the credit bureau, a lot of SMEs are actually failing because of that element, because we failed to be able to secure funding from an institution. So, but we have the money. We're going to go and actually create a stockfell and put together a farming stockfell to make sure that we farm. So we never actually look at how do we work with stockfells as opposed to actually taking over the stockfells. How do we ensure that we capacitate the stockfells, and how do we go on a 50-50 model to say, you know what, guys, make sure that you have a stockfell. This is the stockfell that you're running. This is everything that you're already doing. How do we now capacitate you in bringing you the necessary funding that you need? We are busy with the Ekasi Sponsor shops that is actually being piloted in Ekurhuleni, where we're looking at how do we make sure that the SMEs that are producing toilet papers, your cheese, your dried fruit, are able to have access to market, because most of the time, the SMEs do not have access to your Woolworths, your ShopRite, to Pick n Pay. The requirements are quite high. But we are our own market. We live in these areas. How is it that we're not actually using the sponsor shops that are in our areas to make sure that we are able to buy products that we actually produce ourselves? Because we cannot always be consumers of goods. We need to get to a point of producing and ensuring that we sell to our own market. And if we can be able to perfect that value chain of how do we make sure that from a farmer, someone can be able to get produce from a farmer, produce a tomato sauce, and that tomato sauce be delivered to a distribution center that gets to be delivered in a sponsor shops, where I go to a sponsor shop and get proper quality food, as opposed to counterfeited goods from the Somalis. That would be something that is innovative. And when we talk about innovative funding, how do we fund the system as opposed to funding the SME? How do we fund intermediaries that will make sure that they capacitate the SMEs on the ground? Because you're saying that there's an issue when it comes to compliance and the quality of application that you receive. And there is an issue. I mean, those people do not know even how to fill a form, especially if you own a sponsor shop and you're just run by yourself. But what are the intermediaries that are there that can be able to make sure that they support those SMEs and those sponsor shops, those mama at the corner that are selling vegetables, to make sure that we create a network that can be able to be funded? And that's what we're busy with. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Ntate Elvis. I think you've shared a number of things, and I'm hoping that the representative from the department has made a note of that. And what you've mentioned as well with regards to experiences in the rural areas is the same thing. I don't want to present my contribution, but just echo what you're saying is some of the things you've mentioned about small businesses not being able to complete certain forms to access the funding. You have to literally go to them and assist them to complete. the forms. That would unlock the funding. I think we've experienced that as well. And that could be a number of things, whether it's literacy, either from reading or writing, or even computer literacy. That's the other challenges we've observed. And thanks for your contribution. Would like to give this opportunity to Mr. Colin. Colin was presenting before tea time, and I think he had already started on innovative solutions to enable youth-owned businesses to access funding. But we are hoping that in addition to what he shared before tea time, there are other gems that you've left for us.
Thank you very much. I think what I have heard on the platform today is that for us, by us, that we cannot exclude young people when we come up with these policies, but we need to include them in every step of the way. From where we are sitting, and I'm going to take a policy perspective on this, is that we understand and we know that financial inclusion in South Africa is still a big issue for us. We further understand that if you look at what is happening around financial inclusion, we speak about moral hazard, we speak about adverse selection, and you know what? That for me is jargon. It is things that we speak about because academically so it makes us then believe that this is where we are not doing well. But what are we doing in terms of moral hazard as well as adverse selection when it comes to financial inclusion, especially for our young people? One thing that I have also gotten off the platform this afternoon or this morning is digital inclusion. And I have again just realized how important it is that we take people in townships and rural areas with us on this journey of SMME development, and therefore it becomes important that we look at that too. Now, when we speak about funding, we cannot speak about funding without looking at ways that people could potentially be funded in terms of where they are at. There's a lot of funding policies. The banks, as I've said previously, would want you to give them collateral of 100 to 120%, meaning that a lot of our young people would never be able to do that, especially the ones that comes from a previously disadvantaged background, because they just do not have that. We've seen what mobile network operators have done on the rest of the continent in terms of, coming up with financing solutions that would, surpass what banks could potentially do, because we've seen also that on the continent, a lot of people do not have banking accounts. Here in South Africa, yes, we have it, but how are we making sure that we look at, what mobile network operators can do? We've seen retail stores coming on board and also assist with financing of SMMEs now. Another one that I want to just speak about is where I've heard on the platform, please create a conducive environment for us. And by creating that conducive environment is to make sure, I'm going to go back to pre-investment, that pre-investment is such an important part of what we need to do to get to our land of milk and honey, and that is to be financed. And therefore, we need to make sure that people understand the importance of pre-investment. Now, when we look at who is actually, funding us, we look at different ways, venture capitalists, we look at, family, friends, or fools. We look at all those kind of things. But the one thing that we really need to look at, study it, and really increase it in South Africa is the use of credit guarantee schemes. Because we've seen how that could potentially assist, a people that do not have what is needed by banks to be able to assist them. The National Development Plan 2030 speaks about 11 million jobs that needs to be created. We have shed 2 million jobs during COVID. And where are we going to look for those jobs? We're going to look for those jobs from entrepreneurs and SMMEs. And a lot of those jobs must come from these young people that we are speaking about today. They must become, employers that will employ these young people, and therefore that conducive environment is so important. But also when we speak about entrepreneurship and SMME development, we speak about a challenge that you need a solution for. And therefore, when young people start their journey of entrepreneurship, we need to look at, before the financing, how do we then address the challenge? Because then the finance will definitely follow. I think in CEDA, what we have seen is that our incubation space plays such a critical role for our incubatees to be able to get the finance. But the one thing that we have always seen is a struggle, is especially with seed funding. And how do we create spaces where seed funding becomes available for these entrepreneurs, and that, within the ecosystem, that they could be financed? I think one of the colleagues on the stage spoke also about catalytic funding, and we've seen how that becomes important. We've got so many players within the ecosystem that could potentially assist us with that funding. But how do we get to the point where young people can tap into that funding? Again, I'm going to say, for us, by us. I think it is important that we also look at what is happening within the fintech space. There's quite a number of things that we can take from the fintech space, and even so, if we have to look at how do we become not even risk averse, but how do we look at risk, then we need to look at the insurtech space. And therefore, it is two spaces that people are working on currently. There's a lot of entrepreneurs going into that space, but is it enough so that we can get to a point where we can assist entrepreneurs and small businesses wherever we are at? The department, through its agencies, are rolling out what we call the Township and Rural Entrepreneurship Program, but does it really speak to the needs of people in townships and rural areas? And therefore, it is important for us to take these learnings and then go back and say, you know what, from a financial perspective, this is what we can do to make sure that it changes. As I've said, we've seen how on the continent that innovation is really what is driving success of finances, because the continent understands that they are not at the point where we are at in terms of, our systems, because we think that we are forward thinking and we've got these systems that is working. But when you look at the continent and you look at financing, the methods of financing that they are using, that is working for the continent. And why are we not investing in those type of financing? Because we've seen within the agricultural space how mobile network operators are using your spend on airtime, because they know that you use a lot of airtime to contact your suppliers, etc., and how that could potentially make sure that you are then being funded. How that same form of financing would assist you to be able to get seedlings, and how that would also then, in turn, give you insurance against any risk that might come. So I believe that in our innovation, in the way that we look at financing, we need to ask ourselves that as an African country, does some of the things that we are looking at and that we are working on, is it really for our constituency? Is it for the people of South Africa? And then we need to say, there are people that's at a specific level, let's have them at that level. But then there's people that's at a different level, and how do we bring them up to where they are part of what we want to do in terms of financial inclusion? Yes, we spoke about cooperatives, we spoke about stokvels, but I think it's also important to say that as much as we want financing to happen, we need to get more deposits in as well. And how do we get those deposits? I think Alva spoke about it when he spoke about the fact that they contribute R1 million through a stokvel. That could be on lend to more SMMEs so that we can enlarge the pool, we can make the pool bigger. And colleagues, I think that is the type of solutions that we need for our own issues or challenges that we are facing within South Africa. I also believe that one thing that I take from what was said was, let that rand actually circulate within the specific economy that it was used in. If it's in a township, let it at least circulate 10 times before it leaves the township. And then we look at how do we then increase. I mean, it's so easy for us to go out and buy a pair of Levi jeans and whatever, but we've got people in our townships doing these kind of things. But when they charge us the prices that they charge us, we wouldn't want to purchase it from them. And that all contributes to an ecosystem of finance. I also believe that it is important that we look at how some of what is happening in the incubation space, as I've said, especially with innovative financing, how do we then increase that through fintech, through insurtech, etc. With that, I'm going to stand back. There's so much that I want to speak about. Grants through the DTIC. We've got grants to through CEDA. There's Ashburton from, the Rand Merchant Bank. That is also there. There's the Cooler Credit Guarantee Scheme. We've got such a lot in the country that we could potentially use, but it is how do we make sure that it works for our young people? And that is what is important. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lisho. A mouthful indeed. What I'm not hearing coming across as well is funding from corporates, ESD, for example. We read about funds that are available in the ESD space, but we don't have a way of tracking the impact that they are having in the country. And I think, other than myself, I'm keen to hear about other innovative ideas of how to coordinate that funding, which is soft funding. It doesn't need collateral. It just needs developmental tick boxes to be marked. Thank you for that, panelist. I would like to take this opportunity and engage our delegates in person at the venue, including virtually online. I'm trying to watch who's going to be giving me those questions online, but I already see 2 hands. There's a mic that should be roving on the floor. 2 became 6. That's fine. What I suggest we do is let's take 6 questions and then get a response. And we might not even necessarily have to get a response from the panelists. If members in the room, they have answers, you are very much welcome to provide inputs as well. And then after those 6 questions, let's give those who are joining us virtually to share their questions as well. You may go ahead.
Oh, thank you for starting with me, because I was burning with what they were saying currently. So I was scared that they're going to start somewhere and then that burning is going to go down. To emphasize on what Itumeleng and Elvis was saying, I think I should share a bit of my story first. As a farmer, as an agricultural partner with Ekasi entrepreneurs, where we are working with young people and SMMEs in the ground. My story is, I'm a farmer, I have 100 hectares of land, I'm into cotton production and sugar bean production. So the issue that we're having, it's that the departments don't support primary agriculture. And this is the system of systems. So if we're not funding primary agriculture, where do we expect to get raw materials for those manufacturing and processing? So to be able to sustain that, we need to start with the ground which is primary agriculture. As a cotton farmer now, without us as cotton farmers, there won't be clothes that you're wearing. There won't be cooking oil that is in the stores besides the farmer, the primary agricultural farmer. So to be able to reach that point, we need to start with primary agriculture. Another thing now, that the challenge that we're having as farmers in the agricultural space, when we're applying for this, mostly when now for CIFA and other programs, we're assisting them to apply, they're saying we fund agro-processing only. To emphasize on what they were saying about the spaces that are gonna make us as SMMEs to be able to access so that we can do byproducts of or manufacturing or the hubs. The situation that I'm having currently, we are challenged with as cotton farmers. We went back and did a review. The review was this, and then we said, okay, what can we do to have the byproducts of our products? So we took the seed and wanted to do oil, but there's no way we can find a hub near the villages. There's no hub. Now we have to look for hubs that are far away from us as SMMEs to be able to enter into that agro-processing system. Again, there's a lot of red tapes where we can't access our products can be certified due to that. We don't have access to that. For an SMME to get certified, there's a huge amount to pay to be certified to SABC, to SABA. We talk about it, how can we sustain this value chain without supporting the agro-processing. The other point that I can point out is lack of cooperation between the departments that cause failure to SMMEs. Mostly we find, as they were saying, compliant companies, but they are not the ones that are in operation. I can say a story about how this works. We were once funded by Department of Small Business due to cooperative intensive scheme. I only got a visit when they came to check, first time only. There was only one visit from Department of Small Business. But they never came again to see the progress within. What is happening with the program? How far are you? What are the challenges? What is stopping you to reach this point? There's no follow-up after that. They just come and bring the money and then leave.
Okay.
So that's one of the things that cause the problems that we're having as SMMEs.
Yes.
So, yeah.
So I think quite a mouthful was said in terms of the contribution. My suggestion would be let's mention a problem and maybe a suggested solution as well, so that the department, they can be able to take inputs and be able to say how can they help solve those challenges as well. So I think maybe let's give somebody else an opportunity, and maybe let's try and keep it to one problem, one suggestion, because there's virtual members who would like to contribute as well.
Okay, my last point is that let's fund programs such as ECASI Entrepreneurs so that they can assist us, assist the department with this funding programs. Thank you.
Thank you. I think the intermediaries are coming quite a lot. There's a need for outlying areas to establish intermediaries, not only for funding, but to get SMEs, youth-owned businesses to be funding ready as well. Thank you for that, ma'am. We are going from this. There was. And then we're going to go back to, I think the third input we'll get from the gentleman at the back, because I think he raised his hand first. But you may go ahead.
Thank you. The unfortunate part is that I'm coming from agriculture as well. But I just want to...
Sorry to disrupt you.
Yes.
Can you maybe mention your name and if an area or an organization that you
Yes.
come from? Yes.
My name is Kahisho Mura. I'm a director of Young Farmers Agribusiness. I'm located in the far Pretoria East along R25. I'm a mixed farmer doing livestock and crop. So now I want to touch on the policy part of things. We set in the development of the master plan, especially on the broiler, not the agro-processing one. And initially when we were crafting, we are there. And when the smaller group that has to speak to the minister on the nitty-gritties, what needs to be done, we're excluded. You still want to talk to the white guys who are in this problem because of them. Now we develop an IDC Agri-Fund, and then the IDC Agri-Fund is a blended finance. Yes, they don't want collateral, but there's a catch. They say you need to be integrated, vertical integration. You must be, if you are doing broilers, you must be having an abattoir that says, I'll take your products. And now when you go to the abattoir says, where is the funds? And the funders there say, where is the offtake? So what is it that you're actually saying we should do? So that's one problem that needs to be addressed. The unfortunate part is that we don't sit in those discussions. So we need to have a seat on the table and right at the end of the whole discussions. So, and we also were involved through the Youth in Agriculture and Rural Development on the youth strategy. We're helping the Department of Agriculture. When we develop these strategies, they will fund a university, academics to come and craft a policy that is more on the, what do they call, desktop research. They're telling, no, we have interviewed so and so, this is what we have came up with, which is not realistic. But with that fund, why don't you just go to the grassroots level to ask us what is it that we need? And the policies developed tailor-made to the problems that we're actually facing instead of imagining issues.
Thank you.
So yeah, thanks.
So I think the department is here and hopefully they are listening to that suggestion. I was hoping you'll offer a solution with regards to what you mentioned earlier about vertical integration. When you go to the market, they say, do you have capacity? When you go to the funder, they say, where's the market? I don't know what your suggestion is, but hopefully we'll find some solutions on the floor. Let's take the mic to the gentleman at the back there.
Okay. Can I go first? Can I go first and then I'll give?
Can we give the gentleman at the back there? Is that JT who had the mic? We'll come back, JT. Yes, yeah.
Thank you, Chair. I'm Raymond Matlala from Black Umbrellas. On quite a few things. I mean, Mr. Collins speaks about access to finance, while the research by Leseho speaks hinders in accessing finance. I think we need to differentiate between availability and access. And from that on, we need to make a point in terms of what is accessible and what is available to youth in particular. And also, we're talking about funding, and this is the main point of the day, but we can't separate funding and access to market. Because you can have funding, but if you don't have a market, that funding becomes useless. And I think these two things should go concurrently. If you look at sectors such as your mining, agriculture, energy, the franchise retail, these are owned by big businesses. Where's the market? Where's the access to market to those for young people there? And we talk about township economy, but we're busy building malls. And who runs malls? It's big business. So where are we going in terms of our strategies and approaches that we're doing as government? And the last thing is that I think we've been working in silos as a country. So Gauteng Youth War Room speaks about the incubation model that is not working. And today we're talking the same thing, and we actually saying, let's go ahead and do this thing. And while Gauteng War Room says it's not working. So I'm not sure to what extent can we come together. If you look at in education, they've got a structure called NASCI and NECT, where NGOs within education space and working with government to talk about these models. And I think as government, there should be a more coordinated effort between provincials and nationals and other respective government that works with youth development in SA. Thank you.
Thank you.
Can you repeat that again? No, I'm saying that's what the Gauteng War Room is saying. Yeah, that the incubation model in South Africa, it isn't working.
So what I'm hearing is the concept of incubation works. However, the way it is structured does not suit the environment. So incubation as a concept does work. It needs to be customized for each province or each community.
And I think the facilitator just said what I wanted to say when it comes to incubation. And I'm not biased towards the instrument because I think it works. And we have research that we've done to show that it works.
Is that JT? I can't see clearly.
It's Mia.
Yes.
In South Africa, it works, right? So it's where you look and how you look. And I think the Gauteng province might have a different narrative in terms of this process. But I agree with you. I think we need to have a conversation. For me, Chairperson, I hear a lot of good comments that came from the floor. Mine is just on first CIFA, and it speaks about a suggestion that I would like to make to CIFA. You and CEDA are brother and sister entities, yeah? Why don't you speak about incubation, but why don't you think that incubation should be your de-risking platform, to de-risk your money? Because if there's no de-risking, the money doesn't flow. So it's not about you working with CEDA. It's use the instrument that you have and put your money in the incubators, and you will get a better value, right? So that is one suggestion to CIFA. I think it's not about talking, it's about just implementing what the policy says. Take the money, put it in incubators, and incubators de-risk for you. On East Square, I think the suggestion that was made is such a good one. South Africa doesn't have a risk capital fund. We don't fund pre-seed, seed, and early stage Series A. Not in South Africa. We don't have that instrument. So my suggestion to all the players is, don't you think it's about time, and we spoke about it, many literature wrote about it, why don't we create a risk capital fund? Right? No one invests early. You have to go to family, fools, or friends. I think Colin spoke about it, right? And sometimes I think government becomes a fourth fool because we invest without de-risking our money. Whilst we have a CIFA, but they don't use the instrument that sits next to them to de-risk for their money for them. So it's something that I sometimes think we are confused ourselves. But the importance of a risk capital fund, I think Cheryl spoke about it. I think it's very important to create a risk capital fund for South Africa. I also think that the importance of a value chain fund. I think, Chairperson, you and I was in a program where we understood what value chain funding is all about. So the guys from agriculture speaks about value chain, right? So you have to fund within a vertical. When you look at poultry, you have to fund within a vertical integrated process, right? So there's where vertical funding comes in. So I think it's about time that we introduce a vertical value chain fund, right? That is also risk-based. Because you see, the one thing I heard earlier about failure and fear of failure, we have been taught that it's better to fail, but fail fast and fail forward. And it's better to invest in someone that has failed than invest in someone that has never tried. I think in South Africa, we invest in people that have never tried anything. For some reason, they get money. I don't know why. I believe we fund the wrong entrepreneurs in South Africa, and I think we need to get that right. We fund people that have never run a business. They still work, but they get money. And the entrepreneurs that are grinding every day, you heard the farmer, they don't get money. But people that are working at a full-time job, they get money somehow. I don't know. Thanks. And I think that is the crazy part. But yeah, I think value chain fund, let's look at potentially creating a value chain fund. It's innovative. It funds within a value chain. It doesn't fund just one part, but funds the whole value chain. I think that is something that we don't have in South Africa.
Thanks.
And my last one is on EIA. I think the lady spoke about EIA. Colin, maybe this one is for you. Increase your conformity assessment instrument. Because when you go and you want to invest in conformity assessment, you fund only 60,000 Rand. An EIA alone costs close to 200,000 Rand. And if you don't have an EIA in a farming concern, where it's broiler, you can't farm. If you don't have water rights, you can't farm. And CIFA, when you go to CIFA, they don't fund EIA. You know, so how are you going to get farmers to farm if they can't get an EIA? So I think Colin has an instrument sitting in his bouquet that is conformity assessment, but I think it's limited to 60,000. I think it can go up to 120, but we have now learned that an EIA alone is more than 200,000. Thanks.
Thanks. And I think it would be also helpful when you make suggestions, maybe give examples where some of those ideas could be working. You mentioned CIFA de-risking through CEDA. It is probably done in the private space where a venture capital uses an incubator to de-risk their investment. So if there are examples, mention them so that the department can take that as a homework to go look at those case studies where those things are working. Similarly, into value chain investing, there's a number of VCs who are investing in the value chain. So let's not only mention suggestions, also make reference to examples. I think we'll take last two and then we'll go to virtual attendance.
Hi everyone, my name is Mbalinkosi from the South African Youth BRICS Association. I agree with Itumeleng. Most government programs, you find they say it's a youth program, but you find that 20% is youth and 80% is old people. Today I want to speak about township economy. A lot of money was released by the president for township economy, while we know exactly who occupies township economy. And then you find that there are programs for township, but they're actually not done in the township. They're actually done in Sandton or in the north, but it's meant to uplift people within the township. And then the saddest truth is that those with ideas don't have funding, and those with funding don't have ideas. How do we then ensure that funding criteria are user-friendly for the youth? Thank you.
Thank you very much. And maybe just as a follow-up question, how can whoever is responsible to fund youth-owned businesses enable or makes the criteria to accommodate or to prevent the capital flight from the township? What sort of criteria could be used?
I think there should be a workshop whereby people are equipped on how to fund. On how to follow the funding process and how to fill the forms, because the form itself is a stumbling block.
That is coming through again in terms of enabling the youth-owned businesses to complete funding applications. I think Ekasi mentioned it as well. Let's get input from...
Thank you, Chair. The name is Monde Zuma. I'm from a company called Mamelodi Bez. So there's a lot that has been said, but the last few comments also just show us something. The one gentleman mentions that, incubators are not working according to the Gauteng War Room. And the other one, I think JT says it's actually working. That on its own for me says we need to relook at the whole funding mechanism and how we actually process it. How do we have state organizations speaking past each other or even contradicting each other? But coming with solutions. One, when we're talking about access to your CFAs, the CEDAs and the like, to get the information across, we need to consider zero rating the CEDA side as an example. We need to, when we're hosting such events, instead of having it only on Zoom, how do we get this particular session to be on a virtual platform that can be zero rated, that will allow someone who does not have data but can be contributing and learning alone from such. And then again, linked to that, once we have zero rated platforms, let's have this one-stop solution where, for the example, brother and sister, CEDA and CIFA, I can apply to it depending on the input that I put on the platform. It can go to CEDA for certain things for investment. Once I've gone through that, automatically, because it's on one platform, CIFA can take over, GEP can take over. But instead of me walking across, I'm in Pretoria, CEDA is in the CBD. There's no longer CIFA. So it means after I get interventions from CEDA, I need to drive to, I think it's Riversense. So we need to also look at such because it does stifle. And linked to that, someone mentioned, I think it was, I forgot one of the ladies, who said, when it comes to mentoring, we should consider people that have experience in having run businesses without disrespecting anyone. I would love that to be applied to frontline staff members at CIFA, CEDA, and all other entities, because at times there's a mismatch. Let me put it in practicality. I got a contract a couple of years ago to do debt collections for a couple of entities. When I went to CEDA and CIFA while they were still in Arcadia, one of the people laughed at me and saying, "Why are you doing debt collection? This business will not succeed." I was young, and they were making fun of me. And then I turned around. I was a bit cheeky then. I said, "Lady, you are working at CIFA. how much is your debt book? How are you going to collect on it? Only then, it clicked to say, this person is coming with an industry that ordinarily is not funded by CIFA or CEDA, but there is an element of, there is opportunity for us to be helping them. And then moving along, when it comes to compliance, I'm a firm believer in compliance coming from corporate. How do we, come with an innovative way to teach, especially the youth, to say, how do you become compliant? And how do we as government make it less costly for one to, to get business compliance and the time factor of getting business compliance? We saw with the COVID relief initially, we wanted everyone to be SARS registered, to also be registered with UIF. But I'm thinking of someone who owns a spaza shop. You're telling that person to be registered with Department of Labor. So such things, they need us to also relook. And again, the thought of why are we, having so many people failing to get funded, the rejection, the analyzing, I think it came in as part of recommendations to say, we need to get the information to say why our SMMEs not getting funded, because in that way, it will inform us on how we can be innovative in order to fund. There's so much money around, yes, again, it is available, but why are we not getting it right? And then just to wrap up, is to say the infrastructure-wise, we need to look at infrastructure in especially township and rural areas to say, if you give me money as a tech business, but there's no infrastructure in Mamelodi for me to, to fully operate, I will ultimately close. And then again, an innovative way, as, I pack it, is to say, I'm from, a township, and most people, we know of quotas, the quota industry is quite, lucrative. But if you look at whether it's Soshanguve, Kwamhlanga, there's a lot of people that are selling amakota. But who is planting those potatoes? Who is providing the fish oil? That's where I believe the value chain comes in to say, yes, let's fund these people, but to circulate the rent. Once they are funded, how about we ensure that we fund other people to ensure that there's a whole value chain? Because otherwise, the people who are in Mamelodi are going to the fresh produce market. We're taking the rent out of there. So I think the innovative way is to say, mostly the consumed or funded businesses that we are having, how do we ensure we put funding mechanism to support them and to ensure there's more in the value chain that can remain in those particular communities? Thank you.
We have input from online. Sorry, but Monday, I heard you about collaboration between government agencies. There's plans to consolidate or bring together CIFA and CEDA. Would that solve some of the challenges that you are referring to? How do these agencies collaborate?
My good sir, for me, it's not a matter of just merging the two. If we merge them, what is the intent? What is the outcome that we want? Because for me, it's to say, if I make a silly example, if I'm selling food and someone is selling those other beverages of after 4, the thought of it is to say, there's a chisanyama, people are going to buy meat. One person is selling alcohol, we're drinking there already and we're going to eat. So, there's a chain there, there's a link. So when we bring CEDA and CIFA into one house, we need to be saying the starting point is this. As an entrepreneur, you come in, there's a checklist. What have you done? Because, with all due respect, Bra Colin, I don't expect a person like, Elvis or someone who has been in corporate to go through pre-investment. But if there's like a checklist and there's assessments that are done, they can go through that and then CIFA can pick up. But we literally need to kind of break the two entities and create an entirely new one. Not just merge them, but literally remove a lot of things that are there. And then just one thing that I also want to show you. They tried something in Mamelodi, back then to say, when you are incubated at Ekasi Labs, there should be GEP that comes in to fund you. But here's the problem. The people that were intaken by Ekasi Labs were not matching what GEP was funding. As much as they had an agreement, you are then there and nobody's supporting you. But if we can say, people that are coming to CEDA to get catering equipment, is there a fund that CIFA is providing? If there isn't, what will it help to measure them? Thank you.
Thanks for the inputs. Let's get contributions online.
Thank you very much. There is a question from an online participant, Haslem Mendez. She asks, for SIFA, how will you help people who bring applications that are not up to standard? And how will the process of applying for funding get more quicker for businesses to operate sooner? And her last question is the Youth Challenge Fund open for applications now? There's also a comment related to the Youth Challenge Fund. Kaya says that the Youth Challenge Fund must not be a once-off submission of business plans, but must be a continuous funding that is available and not cut off.
Are those all the online contributions? Thank you very much. May we have maybe a representative from CEDA responding to those inputs? Is it SIFA? Yes.
Okay, I think the first question relates to making sure there are incomplete applications, what do we do with them. Currently, we work with CEDA. We refer back to CEDA so that they can be contacted and then they submit the outstanding information that is required. And then I think the other question relates to, is the fund open? Currently, it is closed, but then we are in preparation of opening it. A date will be communicated soon on when it's going to be opened. And then other question?
The other question is that the Youth Challenge Fund must not be closed. It must be continuous.
Yes, on my opinion, I feel like that's what we need to do, because the current struggles that we have, because it was a time-framed kind of open application. Hence, maybe we are struggling with some of the guys because they feel like we are against time, so we must quickly submit what we can.
All right, thanks. I think that's an easy low-lying fruit that could be implemented immediately. Hopefully, if the powers that be agree with that. Any inputs or thoughts on the comments that have been made on the floor from our panel members? Any suggestions, any thoughts, any contributions from the challenges? Because some of the challenges did not have follow-on solutions. Yes, Colin?
I think let me go first, and then I will allow them to go. From a CEDA-CIFA's perspective, and the fact that we are going through this amalgamation, process. So obviously that is for making sure that we become an entity that would really be able to service people, even in the way that it will be set up, because we understand that some of the things that we are doing in CEDA doesn't necessarily find expression within SIFA, and therefore it is important for us to bring the two entities together and making sure that that is what then happens so that it is a seamless process. I think on the incubation side, I'm not going to defend it. That is the space that I am in. That is someone's opinion. If they want to know, they need to come and ask, and we would be able to have a conversation. And I think that was really the two for me from a CEDA-CIFA perspective that I just needed to say. But I think we've really come far with what is happening within the incubation space and how it is really, for us, it's a game changer. It is really breaking barriers in terms of what entrepreneurs in the country need and how these incubatees are able to come into a space where previously they didn't have that space. Now that we've added our digital and township hubs and how that changes the landscape of entrepreneurs within townships and digital in townships or rural areas, it is indicative of the fact that we are on a trajectory that is setting us apart, because we need to understand what it is that SMMEs and entrepreneurs in this country need. Thank you.
How are we doing on time? Are we out of time? All right. I think the message that I'm getting is, and 90 minutes will never be sufficient to engage the stakeholders or the ecosystem. And there's more than enough, I think, outside of this room in South Africa to contribute to the policy and even good practices. The question is, how do we get that information? How do we get those learnings, those suggestions, and incorporate them, or even use them without even the intervention of government? Because I believe that some of the suggestions does not have to wait for government to implement them. It's about civil society, communities, even corporates implementing them. The question is, how do we create a library and a portal where these good practices can be implemented? I don't have an answer for that, but hopefully someone from the department will carry that as a scarf-tin or a doggy bag. All right. And with that said, I would like to take this time to thank our panel members. Thanks for your contribution. And I'm hoping that that will inform the policy that will be approved next year. And next in our agenda, we have Ms. Amanda Jitsing, who will be able to come forward and summarize some of the discussions for the day. And then after Amanda, then we'll have Khosi Motswani, who will then close the session for us.
Thank you. Can we give them a round of applause? Good afternoon, everyone. People are tired. Dumelang. Better. Sambanani. Good. Okay, let's all stand quickly, and I'm going to ask everyone who's online to log into Menti. So go to www.menti.com and type in the code 74431300. So everyone, stand up. We sit too much as human beings, don't you think? Yeah, the whole day. Okay, great. Because the reason that we're standing up, and let's just take a deep breath, that'll help. Ready? Because I want you to put your solution cap on, right? Please put it on. I want to see. Hats on? Do you have your solution hat on? Excellent. I hope the people online have their solution hats on. Was it Itumeleng? I can't see her. Itumeleng, where are you? You gave us a shellacking about, older people making policy. So we're going to ask young people to make their voices heard. So you can all sit down. And I'm going to ask you to log into Menti. I see a lot of online people showing us some love. Wonderful. I'm going to ask online people to log into Menti, as well as, the audience. Please log into Menti. Are there any young entrepreneurs in the house? Yebo, I'm a young entrepreneur. Or if you're not so young like me, you're like a fine bottle of wine. We have some entrepreneurs. Come, let's hear the entrepreneurs. Oh, there's a lot of wine bottles. Good. It means we're going to get drunk by the end of today. We have only 12. I'm going to encourage people. So everyone in the room can also log in. The code is up there, 74431300, and the people online can also log in. Awesome. Now, I'm going to ask in the room, yay, we're getting some there we go. The young entrepreneurs are catching up because we really want to hear their voices. Now we are at parity. We want a few more entrepreneurs, hopefully. Good. Okay, so about half-half in the audience, right? Who watched the game Pirates versus Amazulu yesterday? On Saturday? Anyone? Yeah? Were you happy with the result? Were you happy because Pirates won? Okay. I was very sad because Amazulu lost. Okay. Entrepreneurs, more entrepreneurs, great. So I'm going to ask a first question, and while I ask that first question, I'd like people in the room, you can choose to either, respond verbally or alternatively you can type in. But, for those out there in the virtual space and for those in the room, what was your main takeaway from today? What was your main takeaway? And, since we don't have much time, I'm going to pick people. So could I get a roving mic? I'm going to ask at the back, I think there was a representative from, was it Black Umbrellas? Yeah? What was your main takeaway, sir, from today?
All right, all good. Thank you. So for me, it was really about availability vis-a-vis access.
Okay.
That was my takeaway.
Okay, so just because there's funding available, it doesn't mean it's accessible. Very important. Anyone else want to offer? Itumeleng, can I pick on you? I'm sorry.
I actually wrote mine on the mentee, but it's there that we need segmented funding for young people and not a blanket approach. And then the second one was incubators actually do work. Thank you.
Okay, so there's some agreement that incubators do work, but it needs to be customized. Anyone else want to offer a takeaway from today? Yes, 1, 2, and 3. Lesejo, you're number 3.
Financial literacy isn't spoken about enough when we're regarding funding. So, yeah, financial literacy resources that teach business owners how to use the funds that they get from incubation and all these programs meant to give them money to start their businesses.
Oh, now that I haven't heard today. So I think she gets a chocolate, don't you think? Will you help me with the chocolate dissemination? There we go, well done. Sorry, your name was? Utando, thank you. Lutando, thank you. Yes, sir?
From my take is that we need more collaboration, stakeholders within the ecosystem, because everyone is doing their own thing, and then we don't see where we're going.
Okay. So can I say that, I don't want to tell Utemeleng how old I am because she's going to call me an oldie, but I've worked in government for 20 years. Do you know the first meeting I ever went to in government about 20 years ago, we talked about more collaboration. It's 20 years later, I have a lot more gray hair. We're still talking about collaboration. Do you know what happens with buzzwords? Collaboration, coordination, integration. We all talk about it, but we actually don't really think about how we do it. And that's the big difference. So when it comes to, and Gwabi is here with the funding policy, we need actionable ways of collaborating, integrating, and coordinating, because that's what makes a difference in a complex system. Okay, it was Lesejo. Oh,
okay, it's me before Lesejo. Thank you. The main takeaway for me is pre-investment.
Pre-investment.
Pre-investment. And the other one is just all these ideas and inputs, we put them together so that they can inform our programs.
Okay.
As a department.
So making sure that all the feedback gets integrated into our policy and programs of action. Lesejo? Yeah. Give away chocolates. Definitely.
So 2 things, and partially mentioned, but maybe not really articulated. I think for incubation, it's important that we have a transition plan, right? So you incubate, and you should be able to say, we will transition you, and when we do, what are the partners that are in place to transition you to? Looking at access to markets, looking at funding, it is your duty when you incubate to make sure that you create that transition.
Yeah.
Second, I like what Itumeleng said, and maybe because I'm closer to that age than I am to the wine age. I think there's a lot of mature people in government, and maybe we need to rethink government. Maybe we need to consider who sits in those rooms.
Yes.
Who are those directors? Are they the right people to be making decisions on behalf? Sorry, Pulan. Are they the right people? Are they the right people to be making decisions? I mean, you need a balance, right? I always say to people that you need the maturity to guide the young, but you also need the young to influence where you take, where your informed position comes from. So those are the two main things. Transition from incubation and get the young in government and remove the mature church.
I have another one. I just want to build on Lesejo's point, and she definitely deserves a chocolate. Can we give her a round of applause for speaking truth to power? Excellent. I'm going to, one moment, I'm just going to follow up. In South Africa, and it's one of my experiences, you know, having worked in a number of other countries, we talk about making policy. But we talk about making programs or developing programs. We never talk about co-creating, right? And the language needs to shift because you need to co-create to drive things forward, to move forward. Yes, sir.
Yes. My takeaway is you mentioned something about collaboration being a buzzword 20 years ago. And what I tend to see in terms of the ecosystem is consequence management. In the private sector, if you are unable to sustain your organization with results and financially, then there is no need for you to continue existing.
Yes.
Now, if the ecosystem had a way of being incentivized or having consequences of outcomes, then we will continue to talk. So there are no repercussions on something that is not working. Yes. And in the private sector, it self-corrects itself. Nobody needs to come back to you and say, are you doing monitoring and evaluation? Is it working? No, you watch the bank.
Yes.
If nothing is getting into the bank, then it means whatever you came up with does not work. But unfortunately, we don't have that level of consequence management in the ecosystem. But my wish is if we had, it will be different. We can make a lot of difference.
We could make a lot of difference. I'm going to take one last comment, and then I want you to put on those action thinking hats, because I want us to go to a couple of comments first from the virtual people, and let's thank the virtual audience. And then, Martin, I'm going to save your comment for the high impact action. Because I'm going to, yes, sir.
Yes, I think for me, the takeaway is that the dialogue is government focused.
Yes.
And it's my problem that it's not youth focused. Because if you look in the room, one will ask, what information was shared with the youth for today? And wouldn't it have been better to get those comments online before this dialogue?
Yes.
So now we are here, and we only have about 10 youth-owned businesses inside South Africa. That seeks to influence the policy.
Yes.
And I think for me, that on its own is exclusionary. Thank you.
Thank you. So can I ask you to hold for the next slide? I really value that comment, and I think it links to what Lesejo said, that, you know, we really need to work together, co-create, get the voices of young people and help them develop policy that works for them, right? Last question. Let's put our thinking hats on. I want from each one of you, because the DSBD is in the room, I want one high impact action. And let me tell you what a high impact action is. And high impact action is not a wish. It is something that can be done immediately to help you achieve your goal. What can government or the private sector in this case, because we have to work with our ecosystem partners, do to help youth-owned businesses access finance? So I'd like people online to answer, because this will provide valuable input into the DSBD's funding policy. Great. Any comments or ideas from the floor? Yes, ma'am. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Good afternoon. I'm Petunia, the chairperson of the Franchise Association. One thing that we have been knocking on the DSDB door is to get franchising to form part of the department, because franchising is a tried and proven formula with access to brand equity from a franchisor. And we've seen the winning formulas of entrepreneurship, small business development, and most importantly, job creation. So as FASA, we are ready to partner and have tangible actions to make sure that we create opportunities in the franchising space.
Oh, that's wonderful news. Excellent. We're going to give you a chocolate for that. That's exactly what my colleague Martin talks about, partnerships. Sorry, I'm going to take it, yes, and then I'll come back.
Good afternoon again. During COVID, we did compliance. Well, there was government funding for relief funding. And in partnership with ABSA, we did a compliance support project for SMEs in the township and rural villages.
Yeah.
We did for about 1,000 SMEs. It was quite a great, successful project, and that obviously there was a bit of some mistakes there, here and there, which we have reworked them, and we're actually going to be doing them again. And I think one of the things that we're going to be doing, and I'm inviting quite a lot of FDIs to actually partner with us, is to say we actually want to be able to do more of the due diligence and ensuring that SMEs are compliant and actually reach the minimum amount or requirements of what funders are actually looking for. I mean, it's a discussion that I'm going to be having with Mr. Don Mashele from CIFA on how can AKC entrepreneurs, with the SMEs that we work with in the different industries, ensure that we capacitate CIFA to get the applicants that are actually more ready to be funded for them to be able to easily actually fund that. So
Fantastic.
I think that's what is more impactful.
So again, the theme is partnerships, but you know, if you can't change the compliance system now, let's help businesses comply and have dedicated programs. Martin?
Thanks. I'm Martin Feinstein. I'm a key expert with the EDSE program, which is an EU-funded ecosystem strengthening program. That's the quickest way of explaining it. It's been a fantastic session, and thank you, everybody, for the amazing inputs. I don't think we're going to be able, as a country, to really effectively support early-stage ventures where there is risk without thinking differently about risk, embracing risk, accepting that the best approach, if you're serious about building an entrepreneurial nation, is not to avoid. You cannot avoid risk. You can only manage it. And you don't manage it by trying to shut out risk and only accept the least risk enterprises. So I think that, you know, when you hear DFIs, development finance institutions, talk about we've got to preserve our capital, you know, and you go to the Parliamentary Portfolio Committee and you report, you know, we've lost this much capital. It's seen as a failure. It's seen as a terrible thing. But if you're losing that money in the same way that a true venture capital investor loses money, they're not losing money. Some of their bets are not paying off, but some of their bets are paying off big time. And you've got to learn how to play that game. The fact that you are managing capital to drive growth in government doesn't mean that you're excused from that approach, that, that every other person that is trying to find the winners has learned how to do. So that's a big thing. That's not a quick thing, it's a big thing. The flip side of that could be quicker. I can't remember exactly how long it took for the medical scientists to develop the COVID vaccines. I think it took less than a year. So if a new COVID vaccine, which is an incredibly complex process, can be developed in less than a year, why is it not possible to develop a new approach to credit scoring in less than a year? Because if we can unlock the stranglehold that credit rating agencies have on the market and on access to capital, we can open up a whole new dimension of risk management and access to finance. So we need new developing nation appropriate credit scoring mechanisms that can be agreed by the banking sector and if not, certainly by public funders. Thanks.
Yeah. Thank you.
I think for me, it's for the government to employ people with entrepreneurship experience so that our entrepreneurs can be able to be assisted and developed. Again, is for the government to collaborate with stakeholders which are youth empowerment within the industries for more progress, and educating SMMEs about compliance and bookkeeping, as most of SMMEs master production instead of office work, and that is the thing that is making SMMEs fail.
Okay, great.
Yes, I think we
30
should.
seconds.
Yeah, I think we should then, government focus collaborating with private sector that is ready to work with us. For instance, I'll give you a typical example like in the broiler industry. If they really want to integrate Hunadi as a broiler farmer, there's in-house funding, they give it to her, simple as that. So let's stop wasting time trying to convince the private sector to work with us when they don't want. Let's create our parallel value chains and ecosystems.
Okay, thank you. So I'm going to wrap up. Thank you very, very much. Will you please complete the mentee so that we can pass on the feedback to the DSBD. I'm going to now hand over to the EU. Oh, can I close? Oh, okay, well.
The whole issue of impact bonds, I think it was Elvis who spoke about that. We have not tapped into that market in South Africa, and that's one key area where you can use it as collaboration between government and private sector, taking into account the limited funding we have in the fiscus.
Thanks, Zora. Again, today was about innovative finance, so thank you, Zora, for that. I'm going to hand back to Odette to close. Thank you very, very much to everyone online. And the participants.
Thank you to everybody. And Tevin, I know you want to speak. Let's catch it. Pulani and all of us are here, but we have to close. I'm being chased from all sides. We knew in the planning of this session it would be vibrant, and we planned it to be vibrant and get as much input from the youth as possible. As Pulani indicated at the start of the session, the intention was to get the youth voice, solutions and ideas that can be incorporated into the government policies, but also into the ecosystem and the work that is going to be done going forward. So this is not something government solves on its own. The whole ecosystem needs to do something differently for a change and a shift to happen. So I want to thank everybody for their inputs. I want to thank all the panelists and presenters for the time and the inputs and the efforts, the dialogue facility, Zora, the EDSE, and Amanda for your facilitation of the day, Martin, your technical inputs, our communications team, our panel members, and the departmental staff who contributed into the process. But most of all, I want to thank the small businesses, the youth-owned businesses that participated in the process and made a contribution into this. This is not the end of the conversation. We are going to be taking the inputs and putting it into the various policy documents, and there will be another dialogue. It may not be a dialogue, it may be coming back to you to say, this is what we plan to do, will this work for you? So that is our next step and our next stages. Thank you to our online participants for their active participation. And in that regard, so that we can still get lunch and still let the technical team do what they need to do and all the others, I thank you for your inputs, your time, but please, the departmental staff are here, the EDSE staff are here, Zora is our finance expert, Martin is our business development, SIDA and SIFA are here. Give us your inputs, it doesn't stop, let's talk over lunch. And I officially then thank you and close this session. Thank you very much.